Chapter 420. Master, the cage you want to build is cast. Crone went upstairs to report to Dudian. Dudian nodded slightly. His eyes didn't leave the book. Let Sergei send it to the giant wall. Moreover, call Patriarch Feline to come over. There are important things to discuss. Yes, master. Crone turned away. Ryan family's carriage stopped in front of the castle after half a day. Old Feline and Sander got off together. There were 3 knight attendants. 1 was a gold knight and 2 were silver knights. Weapons are not allowed in the hall. Noyce, who was on duty at the door, stopped them. The 3 knights frowned and turned to look at Old Feline. Old Feline nodded. The 3 knights frowned but still took off their weapons and handed them to Noyce. Patriarch Feline, please. Master has been waiting for you for a long time. Crone invited Old Feline in a humble manner. Old Feline nodded and indicated that the 3 knights didn't need to follow him. He held Sander's wrist and asked him to help him to go upstairs. Sander hesitated but silently helped Old Feline. Crone opened the door and looked at Dudian. Master, Patriarch Feline has arrived. You go out first. Dudian didn't look up. Crone nodded and gestured to Old Feline and Dudian to enter the room. He quietly closed the door and waited for them to enter the room. It's so warm here. Old Feline looked at the fireplace and smiled at Dudian. Dudian used a pen to make a mark on the paper. He folded the corner and closed the book. He looked at Old Feline, who was sitting on the sofa, and Sander, who was standing next to him. He smiled. Patriarch, I haven't seen you for a few days. How are you? I'm quite healthy. Old Feline laughed and leaned his crutches against the sofa. He looked at Dudian. I heard that you had a friction with the Brandon family yesterday. Do you need me to help you settle it? That's not why I called you here. Dean smiled, got up, and tightened his coat. He came to the sofa and sat down. He took out the tea leaves from the drawer under the coffee table. He picked up the thermal teapot and gently brewed a cup of tea. First, he washed the tea, shook it, and brewed it. He poured the water into the tea gutter and filtered it into the sink under the table. Then he filled it with tea. The fragrance of the tea was refreshing. Old Feline was surprised. If your hair wasn't black, I would have suspected that you were born in a noble family. Dean smiled and poured himself a cup. Everyone can learn etiquette. If the library is open to civilians, then the so-called untouchables in the eyes of the aristocracy will be much less. Old Feline smiled but didn't reply. Dean didn't intend to talk about this matter in depth. He went straight to the point. Patriarch, how is the recovery of the Melon Consortium? Everyone pushes the wall when it's down. Old Feline took a sip of tea and whispered, Under your banner, the aristocrats of the Melon Consortium have withdrawn their investment and joined our consortium. But a small part of them have been poached by other consortiums. As for the rest, they won't be able to resist for long. They have framed you and caused public anger. So the people have boycotted all the industries under the Melon Consortium. You know, if you don't make a profit, then it's equal to a loss. If they continue to lose money, then they will soon collapse. Dean nodded. What about the Mel family? That old guy George went to prison. There's no way to bail him out. The prestige of Mel family is not as good as it used to be. It has changed from a bright star to a dim meteorite overnight. The only shining sparks are the friction caused by the rapid fall. Old Feline smiled. The Melon Consortium is completely unable to make a comeback. The Mel family is preparing to declare bankruptcy and start all over again. Dean nodded. We have to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. Old Feline looked at him. I will. After stabilizing the industries of the Melon Consortium, we will manage it well. Dean took a sip of his tea. From now on, I won't provide any practical help to the consortium. Everything will depend on you, Patriarch. Old Feline was startled. This? Why? Sandro, who was at the side, was also taken aback. He asked anxiously, Yes, why? Our momentum is good. The people believe in us. We can attack any consortium, and they won't be able to fight back. If you provide us with inventions in the future, we can even rule the outer wall. Dean looked up at him. Rule the outer wall? You guys are thinking quite far ahead. Don't forget, above the financial groups are the military and the Vatican. Sandro was stunned and asked in confusion, The military and the church? They won't intervene in this matter. Moreover, we have annexed other consortiums, so they can't do anything to us. Dean looked at old Feline. Patriarch, it seems that the outside world is calm. There are only sounds of us nibbling at the melon consortium. However, the other consortiums are ready to go. If we continue to expand, then the military and the Holy Church won't sit idly by. They need balance, and we will break the balance. That's why the temple forbids the masters to have close contact with the aristocracy. Even the masters from the aristocracy can't open the back door to provide unbalanced help to their families. Of course, there are inevitably some masters who have close relationships with consortiums over the years, but they only help a little. If they really sell divine spells to consortiums time and time again and provide too much help, the temple will not turn a blind eye to it. You should understand the stakes involved. Old Feline looked at Dean. According to you, we won't compete with other consortiums in the future. But what if other consortiums compete with us? We'll fight in whatever way we should. Dean said, if they find fault with us, then we will fight back. There will inevitably be frictions and conflicts in business. But I won't do anything. Do you understand that I'm the one who will crush the scales? But don't worry. Although I won't help, but everyone knows that I'm from the New World Consortium. You have done me a great favor, so they won't provoke you too much. Moreover, you can use my reputation to operate. It's more than enough to deal with the other consortiums. Old Feline sighed. There was regret and unwillingness in his heart. However, he was aware of the urgency of the situation. Although it was the universal truth to strive to move up, but if he continued to move forward, he might fall off the cliff. And the cliff was in front of them. I know. Don't worry. Even if you don't help us, as long as you are alive, we only need to borrow your reputation to become the biggest commercial plutocrat in the commercial district. Old Feline said. Dean smiled and continued to pour tea for him. What are you going to do in the future if you don't create inventions? Old Feline asked while drinking tea. Dean smiled. There are a lot of things I can do. With my current status, I'm already a master of my faction. Once my gas faction is stabilized, then my status will be much higher than that of a legendary master. I'm afraid that I'll destroy the world if I continue to study. Destroy the world? Old Feline and Sander were surprised. Wasn't this a bit too big? Dean didn't elaborate. I will teach and train a group of excellent students. Even if one day I'm gone, no one will dare to touch the New World Consortium as long as they are there. That's true. Old Feline nodded. You are very young, but your thinking is very far. I'm an old man who has half of my body in the soil. I haven't thought about what will happen after death. Dean glanced at Zindral and smiled. The plan is always long-term. Old Feline sighed. We may be able to go further if there is no suppression from the military and the Holy Church. Unfortunately, the system of the world is like this. You can't climb up just because you have the ability. No one is willing to share their bowl of meat with others. We're the same. We trample on the people who have the hope to climb up under our feet. We don't want them to threaten us. The temple is better. As long as a genius like you has the talent, you will be able to stand out. Your talent won't be buried. Dean's heart was touched. In fact, any system is the same. If you want to climb up, then it's not enough to be stronger than others. You have to be much stronger in order to rush up. Old Feline sighed. A supreme ruler often needs several generations of contacts and wealth accumulation to turn over. Our foundation is too thin compared to the Holy Church, which has existed for hundreds of years. I hope that the next generation can really rise. Dean looked at him. Patriarch, you are old, but your heart isn't. If the heart is old, then it's useless. Dean received the news that the Bourong family had come to visit after sending off Old Feline. Dean didn't bother to see them, so Crone was in charge. Master, the people from the Bourong family have returned. They came to send gifts. This is their gift. Crone came to the study room and handed a gift box to Dean. The gift box was opened, and there was a contract inside. I was worried that it was a dangerous item, so I opened it without authorization. Crone explained. Dean said, check it in front of me. Yes, master. Chapter 421. Give this to Old Feline. Tell him to send people to recover the land. Dean threw the contract to Crone. Also send a letter to the Bourong family. Don't let me hear the words Borong family again. Otherwise, I'll make them completely disappear from the commercial district. Crone took the contract. He didn't dare to ask more, but bowed his head. Dean continued to read the book after Crone left. Holy Church, military. Their foundation should be in the inner wall. I have to know their details if I want to defeat them. Dean's eyes lit up. Inner wall. It's time to take a look. Dean had just finished his lunch when he heard the sound of a carriage coming from outside the manor. Dean looked through the window and saw that it was his family's carriage. At this time, the door of the carriage was pushed open. Nicholas's figure slowly came down from the carriage. He turned around and made a gentleman's invitation gesture. Several figures jumped down from the carriage. Dean stood up and strode towards the door. Gwyneth, who was next to him, wasn't scared by his sudden movement. She put down the knife and followed behind Dean like a shadow. She was waiting for him at the door. Dean! A few figures jumped down from the carriage. One of them was a burly teenager. He was overjoyed when he saw Dean. He shouted from afar and ran towards him. Dean smiled. The burly teenager threw himself into Dean's arms and gave him a big hug. I haven't seen you for a few years. You've grown a lot. Dean loosened his hand and hammered the teenager's chest. The burly teenager was his best friend from the scavenger training, Mason. Mason grinned and said, I have heard that you are now a very powerful master. The newspapers are full of news about you every day. Among us brothers, you are the best. Not only have you become a master, but you are also a golden knight of the Knight's Hall. I heard that a golden knight is much more powerful than a hunter. Even a senior hunter of a consortium may not be able to beat a golden knight. Mason grinned and said, How can it be compared to your changes? I have heard that you are now a very powerful master. Dean shook his head. I'm a golden knight. There's a difference between an honorary knight and a real golden knight. In short, there's a difference between me and a real golden knight. There's so many crooked things. I want to know whether an honorary knight is powerful or not. Of course. Dean laughed. Gwyneth looked at the back of the teenager in front of her. There was a trace of surprise in her eyes. She had followed Dean for a long time. She knew that the latter paid great attention to his identity and manners. She didn't expect him to say such vulgar words. Mason, you bastard! How can you run so fast? A shout came from behind. Dean and Macon looked over and saw a handsome teenager supporting a plain-dressed teenager with an ordinary face. They were coming together. Zach! Sham? Dean was startled. Although a few years had passed and they had grown a lot, but there was still the shadow of their childhood. However, he noticed that Sham's leg was broken. Moreover, it was sawed off from the thigh, and the lower half did not have a prosthesis. Dean! Zach laughed as he helped Sham to come over. Sham saw that Dean was wearing simple but luxurious clothes. There was a bit of shame on his face. He couldn't help but say, Dean is a master of the temple and a golden knight. We can't call him Dean anymore. Zach responded, Yes, yes. Let's call him Master Dean. What do you think? Mason looked at the two. What nonsense are you talking about? It's awkward. Dean is called Dean. Why are you calling him like an outsider? Am I right, Dean? Dean sobered up. Whatever you want to call me. Sham, what happened to your leg? This, Zach said. We were attacked by a monster when we were scavenging. Sham's leg was bitten and infected with a highly toxic poison. We couldn't detoxify it, so we cut off his leg and saved his life. The smile on Sham's face was somewhat forced as he said, It's good to be cut off. I have no value. I was fired by the consortium, but I can go back to my hometown to help my father take care of the pub. Although I haven't done anything, but at least my physique is a bit stronger than ordinary people. In my area, I'm known as the One-Leg King. Macon laughed and said, Then if we go, wouldn't we be the king of legs? Sham snappily said, I'll make you a ham king. Zach clapped his hands. I agree. Dean smiled. After a few years, they were still as close as before. However, Sham seemed to have changed. In his mind, although he could trust all three of them, but there were differences. Mason was the one he trusted the most, followed by Sham. His mind was flexible, but he was honest. Zach was a bit irritable and selfish, although he had nothing to say to them. But to outsiders, he was the type of person who would not help others. Everything was based on his own interests. although he has now become such a person. But in the beginning, he preferred to talk to Sham. But this time, his feeling has changed. Zach seems to have become a lot more generous. Mason is still as heartless as before. But Sham seems to be a lot more sophisticated, hiding some things in his heart. Perhaps this was the reason why he was fired by the consortium. It was inevitable that things would become complicated if he came into contact with people outside the pub. Thinking of this, he sighed in his heart. However, when he thought of how they had helped each other during training and how they had saved each other during the trial, his heart still felt warm. He said, "Let's go in first. From today onwards, you'll follow me. What do you think?" Macon laughed. "When we came here, I heard the old man say that I didn't want to stay in that broken consortium for a long time. He didn't see us as human beings. Fortunately, you helped us get out of the sea of suffering." "Well," Zach's smile suddenly became a bit low as he nodded. Sham slightly bowed his head and didn't speak. Dean looked at the three of them. He didn't need to think to know how much they had suffered in the past few years. The scavengers' work was no different from slaves. They were sent to dangerous places, but they didn't even have the right to know about the monsters. The only thing they knew was how to pick up resources, how to transport them, how to stay outside the giant wall for a long time, and how to survive without food. Once they encountered the monsters, they would die. However, it was also because of this that the consumption of resources to cultivate scavengers was much lower than that of hunters, and the time spent was also shorter. "Hey, Mr. Dean? Or Master?" At this time, a light voice came. Dean's eyes lit up. "Glenn, long time no see." "It hasn't been that long. Didn't I try to assassinate you last time?" Glenn giggled. Dean smiled. "It's all in the past. Since you are willing to come today, then you're one of us." Glenn blinked her eyes and said, "I won't disturb your reunion. I'll go in first." "I'll go in too." A youth behind Glenn laughed. Dean had long noticed him. He knew that he was a senior hunter of Melon Consortium. He was a knight and a very strong existence. He was on par with Glenn, and his melee combat ability was not inferior to Sergei. "Come in. The wind is strong at the door." Dean turned back to the hall. Everyone followed in. Mason and the other two looked around in surprise. It was the first time they entered the castle of an aristocrat. They didn't expect to see such a scene. Glenn and the youth were also looking around in surprise. They didn't expect that Dean would live in such a simple castle despite his high status. Dean asked everyone to sit down. He told Gwyneth to cook, so there was no need to protect him. "Master, there is someone from the Brandon family outside the manor." At this time, Crone ran in from outside. Glenn and the youth's eyes lit up. The Brandon family had a small reputation among the upper nobles. They had almost the same status as the Milan family of the Melon Consortium. Dean smiled. "Tell them I'm not free. I won't see them." "All right, Master." Crone turned and ran away. Glenn glanced at Dean. "The Brandon family seems to be part of the Scott Consortium. Are you going to cooperate with the Scott Consortium?" Dean shook his head. It didn't take long for Crone to run back into the hall. "Master, he said that he wanted an answer about the toothed crab yesterday." "Answer?" Dean indifferently said, "Throw him out." Crone was stunned. He saw that Dean wasn't joking. He turned around and ran away. "What? You were driven out?" Cage looked at his bodyguard in shock. "He was kicked out by his butler before he even saw him? Didn't you report your name?" "I did, but his butler said he wasn't free. He didn't want to see me. Then he drove me out." The youth replied in an aggrieved tone. "Bastard." Cage slammed his palm on the table and glared angrily. "You robbed my food at my banquet. You clearly want to rob the property of my Brandon family. And now you want to expel my people? Damn you. You're just a brat who hasn't even grown hair yet. What bullsh asterisk team master? You just obtained a bit of power, and you want to go to heaven." The youth was scared. He bowed his head and didn't speak. "Prepare the car. I'm going to the Chai family," Cage said in an angry voice. The young attendant felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders, and he responded before turning around and running away. Chapter 422. Are you going to start a war with the Scott Consortium? Glenn couldn't help but ask Dean after Crone went out. She suddenly realized the purpose of Dean's recruitment. She didn't expect that she would be involved in a more vicious struggle after leaving a consortium. Duddian smiled, but didn't speak. He didn't deny it. It was equivalent to acquiescence. Glenn stared at him. The Mellon Consortium has a very wide network of relationships. You haven't fully recovered them yet. Aren't you too anxious to deal with the Scott Consortium? Duddian smiled. I have a sense of propriety. You don't have to feel the pressure. You will be my private hunters in the future. You won't belong to the consortium, so you don't need to follow the rules and regulations of the consortium. Of course, your remuneration will be 3 times that of the Mellon Consortium. At the same time, I will incorporate you into my personal knight team. You will be an aristocratic knight. Although it's only an aristocratic knight, but it is a relatively decent identity. If you can pass the assessment of the Knight's Hall, then you will be able to transfer to an official knight status. I will help you get rid of your hunter registration. Glenn was startled as she looked at the youth next to her. Glenn couldn't help but ask, "Help us get rid of the hunter registration? Really?" Although their registration was written as civilians, but there was a special symbol behind it. This special symbol represented the hidden registration. In other words, it was the registration of hunters. The taxes paid by hunters were much higher than that of civilians. Moreover, once they committed a crime, they would be severely punished. Most importantly, the registration of hunters didn't allow them to get pregnant and have children. These policies were like shackles that clamped down on the throat of the hunters. This was the reason why the hunter profession had continued for so many years since the Vatican era. But it was difficult to form a scale. Without the right to get pregnant, it was impossible to form a direct family and family system. They could only fight alone. If they were injured, they could rely on their relationship to apply for a position as an instructor or a senior member of the consortium. Otherwise, they could only die outside the giant wall. Glenn's eyes were slightly red. She suddenly got up and bowed to Duddian. "Thank you." There were no words of awe, but it was full of sincerity. "Thank you, Master Dean." The young man stood up and bowed gratefully. Dean accepted both of them. "In the future, you can call me the same as them. I'm in a high position now. I don't know how many people want me dead. As my personal knights, your lives will be threatened at any time. Are you willing?" "Yes," Glenn said without hesitation. "Me too," the young man said quickly. Dean showed a satisfied smile. "Sit down." The two of them sat down. Mason, Zach, and Sham were puzzled as they saw Glenn and Glenn's excited appearance. In the minds of scavengers, hunters were high and mighty. They couldn't wait to become hunters one day. They didn't expect these 2 famous senior hunters to be excited because of the removal of their hunter status. It was hard to understand. Dean turned to look at the 3. "What are your plans for the future?" Mason smiled. "As long as you don't want me to be a scavenger, then I'll follow you." "Is being a hunter not good?" "If that's the case, then I'll be your knight." Dean smiled. "You will die at any time if you want to be my knight. If I die, I'll certainly block the knife for you." "That's worth it." Mason grinned. "During the trial, my life was pulled back by you several times. Without you, I would have died." Dean's eyes slightly moved. There was a bit of warmth in his heart. He didn't expect that Mason would still remember it in his heart. "Me too," Zach also called out. Sham was a bit nervous as he saw both of them open their mouths. He said to Dean, "I also want to, but I don't know." "My legs," Dean smiled. "There is no need to be a knight. I'm short a chef. If you don't mind, then you could be my chef. Last time someone tried to poison me and almost succeeded. I'll let you be my chef so that I can eat in peace." Hearing this, Mason and the other 2 were shocked. Glenn and the youth squinted their eyes. "Poison you? Mellon Consortium? So vicious." Macon was angry. Zach couldn't help but look at the teacup in his hand. He subconsciously put it back on the table. "Sham, are you willing?" Dean asked. Sham was startled. "I'm willing. My family also runs a pub, but I'm not good at cooking, so I hope you don't mind. You can learn from me. I'm very picky." Dean smiled. "I'll invite a chef from a big hotel to teach you. Practice well." Sham scratched his head. "I know." Dean looked at the wall clock and said to Crone, "Call Gabriel and Artemis to come down." Crone went upstairs. After a while, he brought Gabriel and Artemis downstairs. "Introduce yourselves," Dean said. Gabriel and Artemis glanced at the crowd. Artemis was a little shy, and there was a trace of timidity in her eyes. Gabriel seemed to know his sister's timidity. He took the lead and loudly introduced himself. After the introduction, he gave his younger sister Artemis an encouraging look. Artemis followed her brother's style and introduced herself. "They're orphans that I brought back from the war-torn areas outside the Golden Wall." Dean looked at the youth next to Glenn. "Dennis, I will trouble you to teach Gabriel combat in the future. I have a guard who is also a senior hunter. His name is Sergey. He will be outside the giant wall for the next few days, and it will take some time for him to come back. You should assist him." Dennis got up. "Yes, young master." Glenn's mouth curved into a smile. "I have heard about your hunter called Sergey. He had committed a crime and was imprisoned in Thornflower Prison. I saw him fighting outside the Golden Wall. His fighting style is fierce and violent. Dennis's fighting style is more flexible. He likes to use tricks. If this child had learned from Mr. Sergey, then he should be tutoring Dennis. Don't let him go back to his old ways." "It's okay. I'm still practicing the basics." Dean smiled and said to Gabriel, "Let Uncle take you to practice." Gabriel nodded and stepped forward. "Sir, please teach me." Dennis was satisfied as he saw that the boy wasn't shy. "Then lead the way." Gabriel bowed, turned around, and led him upstairs. Glenn watched them leave. Her eyes fell on Artemis. There was a trace of curiosity in her eyes. "I've never seen such green hair. Where did this child come from?" "Probably a mixed blood from different regions," Dean casually said. He saw that Glenn was still looking at Artemis. "Are you interested in teaching her your assassination skills?" Glenn glanced at him. "Have you had such an idea for a long time?" Dean laughed. "I quite like her. I'll teach her then." Glenn stood up and squatted in front of Artemis. "Little girl, I'll teach you some real skills so that you can beat your brother in the future. How about it?" Artemis looked at Glenn's beautiful face. "I don't want to fight with my brother." Glenn was startled. There was a touch of softness in her eyes. She reached out and touched Glenn's head. She picked up Glenn's arm and looked at Dean. "Can I go anywhere in the castle?" Dean took a sip of tea. "In addition to my study room." "Understood." Glenn immediately took Artemis's hand and left. Artemis followed her step by step. She looked back at Dean from time to time. Duddian waited for the two to go far, then turned to Mason and the other two. "You won't blame me for picking you up now, right?" The three were startled. Macon shook his head. "How can that be?" Zach and Sham chuckled. Dean saw that although the two were smiling naturally, but there was a bit of mixed feelings in their eyes. He continued, "You should know about my situation. I was framed by the Mellon Consortium. I had to rely on the shelter of the Ryan family to develop. I was helpless at that time. I didn't know when the Mellon Consortium would crush me. I didn't pick you up because I didn't want to implicate you. Now that the Mellon Consortium has been destroyed, I have the ability to protect myself. I don't have to worry about being inadvertently obliterated." Mason and the other two were shocked. They felt ashamed and touched. "Dean, we know your intentions." Macon bowed his head. Zach and Sham nodded, but didn't speak. Dean was relieved as he saw that the three listened to his words. He didn't want to have any gap between him and his three childhood friends. During dinner, Dean received a custom-made thermal armor from Master Taylor. The interior of the armor was made of delicate magic spider silk, mixed with other precious thermal materials. It was extremely warm. Even in the snowy weather, it would not be invaded by the slightest cold wind. Dean had dinner that night. He called a carriage and asked Gwyneth to be his coachman. Chapter 423. Dean glanced at them and quietly took a detour. Whoosh! The golden wall that was 10 feet high was easily climbed over. This golden wall was not as smooth as the surface of Sylvia's giant wall. On the surface, he could see the outline of the huge stones. With the traces of seams, he could climb over it with just a little bit of force from his fingers. Dean quietly skimmed through the night. The suburbs and towns outside the Golden Wall had long been desolate. Although the war was over, but no one was willing to go back to live in the towns. Moreover, the military had strict control to prevent barbarian spies from sneaking into the crowd. Therefore, the towns were as gloomy and silent as ruins. Dean crossed the towns and went straight to a fortress in the south. As he expected, the fortress was desolate. The military didn't dare to send people to guard the fortress as long as the barbarians weren't expelled from the Red Maple Mountains. Dean ran out of the fortress and went straight to the wilderness. After a moment, Dean came to the place where Splitter was hiding. He jumped down from the cover of the weeds. He saw Splitter curled up into a ball in the tungsten steel cage. Its size didn't grow, but seemed to be a bit smaller than before. Dean was shocked as he saw the weak heat coming from its body. He trotted over to it. Splitter slowly moved its body as it heard the movement. A blood-red compound was exposed on the carapace of its body. It stared at Dean. Dean was surprised as he saw the appearance of the eyeball. The structure of its eyeball wasn't like this before. Did it mean that the eyeball had degenerated after it stopped feeding for more than 10 days? Dean put a nearly 3 meters long crocodile into the cage. He took 2 steps back and signaled Splitter to come forward to enjoy. Splitter's eyes fell on the body of the crocodile. The smell of blood from the wound stimulated the Splitter's nerves, but it didn't immediately rush over. Instead, it stared at Dean. Dean retreated 4 or 5 steps. After a few seconds, the Splitter pounced on the body of the crocodile. Its sharp limbs easily pierced through the tough cuticle of the crocodile. The Splitter tore the crocodile's body and devoured its internal organs. Dean was surprised by the lightning speed of Splitter. He found that the speed at which Splitter extended its sharp limbs was so fast that he couldn't see it clearly. Even though it was starving, Splitter's combat power was comparable to most monsters that were level 30 or so. However, what surprised him the most was the changes in the limbs of Splitter. He had seen the little Splitter that he had raised like pigs until they reached level 40 and the big Splitter. Their sharp limbs were as sharp and thin as sharp knives, but on the little Splitter's sharp blades there were many tiny barbs. At first glance, they looked like very slight saw teeth, but when he looked closely, he found that they were tiny inverted thorns. There was no doubt that once this sharp blade that was covered in thorns pierced into the body of another demon, it would definitely cause the other party to feel excruciating pain when it was pulled out, tearing their bodies apart. However, this was both an advantage and a disadvantage. Although it could cause more wounds and bleeding when it was pulled out, the speed at which it was pulled out would be slower. If it was in a group battle, it was very likely that they would be pinned down because of the slow pull-out. However, if it was a sharp limb like the Great Splitter, stabbing and pulling out were incomparably fast. Even if it was an army of thousands of men and horses, it would still be able to charge forward and harvest at will. Dean was puzzled. How could there be such a difference between Splitter's sharp limbs and other Splitters? Was it because of the way he fed the Splitter was different? Or was it because of some unknown factors caused by hunger? Soon, Splitter ate almost all the viscera of the crocodile. Only the skin was left. It didn't continue to eat, but put the skin of the crocodile under its body. It looked at Dean with vigilance. "It's time for you to move." Dean took a deep look at the Splitter. He pulled out the wooden stakes under the chains one by one. When the second chain was loosened, Splitter pushed the cage. The cage rolled over and rushed towards Dean. Dean dodged and moved to the other side of the chain and pulled it out. Bang! Splitter moved the cage towards Dean. Under Splitter's struggle, the last chain was pulled out from the ground and dragged on the ground. Dean grabbed the chain in his hand and jumped to the basement. He struggled to pull out the cage. The cage had just moved to the door when Splitter rushed towards Dean. Its body collided with the cage and the door. Bang! The door, which was made of concrete, suddenly broke. Dean pulled the chain and pulled the cage to run in the wilderness. Splitter squeaked in the cage as if he was very angry. Dean's arms were sore after running for more than 10 miles. He had to sit down to rest. Splitter struggled fiercely in the cage, banging against the cage with a loud noise. Dean shook his head. "I shouldn't have fed you first. Now you have the strength to toss around, right?" Splitter stopped struggling as it stared at Dean with its bloody, compound eyes. Dean looked at the Splitter as he rested. In the silence, Splitter pounced on the cage. The sharp blades stretched out from the edge of the cage and stabbed towards Dean. But the distance was too short. Dean smiled as he got up and patted the dust off his buttocks. A few hours later, Dean finally dragged the Splitter to a fortress where the Holy Church was stationed. The night was deep, and there was a fire tower on the fortress. Dudian crouched in the grass and looked around. He noticed that there was a hidden red heat in the grass nearby. It was the hidden sentries of the stronghold. Their camouflage was excellent. Their bodies exuded the smell of green grass. Unless one had an extremely sensitive sense of smell, even a senior hunter wouldn't be able to smell them. Dean jumped over the sentries hidden in the grass and finally found a relatively spacious gap where no sentries were stationed. There was a smile on his face as he pulled the splitter and quietly ran over. The splitter screamed from time to time along the way, but gradually got tired. It sat in the cage and allowed Dean to drag it. Squeak! Splitter called out in vain as Dean passed through the gap in the grass. Whoosh! Dudien's soles suddenly exerted force as he quickly ran. Clang! The messy chains at the back touched the cage and clanked. Dean didn't know if the sentries who were thousands of meters away could hear him, but he didn't care too much as he ran at full speed. After running for a few miles, Dean heard a lot of footsteps coming from behind. He knew that the people stationed in the stronghold were alarmed. He couldn't help but sigh. He came to the front of the cage and whipped the chains. The splitter retreated slightly as it saw Dean's momentum. Dudian quickly took out the key and opened the lock of the cage. He looked at the direction of the sound and judged the distance between the two sides. After a few seconds, he opened the door of the cage and ran away. Squeak! The splitter was stunned as it looked at the door that was opened. It paused for half a second before it reacted. It screamed and rushed out. Clang! At the same time it rushed out of the cage. It waved its sharp blade to vent its anger and overturn the cage. Stop! Who is it? Stop! This is the Luminous Church. Stop right now and surrender. Chapter 424. Whoosh! Whoosh! Suddenly, several arrows were shot and nailed into the weeds beside Splitter. The blood-colored compound eye on Splitter's carapace moved slightly, and the dot in the center of the compound eye moved backward. Its body, which was as ferocious as a devil, slowly turned around and pounced forward like a fierce tiger. Its sharp limbs pushed its body forward like a spider. Like a fluffy seaweed, Splitter was caught up in the pursuing team. What is this? Monster! It's a monster! All of a sudden, blood-curdling screams resounded. Countless flesh and bones were cut and torn apart. Splitter rushed into the group of Knights of Light. Its seaweed-like body was like a meat grinder. Its sharp blade easily pierced through the chest armor of the Knights of Light. Its movement was swift and violent. The blood-red compound eyes on the carapace moved slightly as it easily dodged the attacks coming from all directions. Dean ran for hundreds of meters and looked back to see the one-sided massacre. He frowned and sighed. He took out his dagger and quietly returned to the front of the cage to watch the battle. Don't panic. Open the shield formation. A young knight, riding on a white horse, shouted angrily. His handsome face was filled with fear as he anxiously shouted at the defeated troops in front of him. However, under the fast attack of Splitter, these well-trained Knights of Light were already scared out of their wits. How could they care about his shouts? They turned around and ran away. The young knight was anxious and angry. He gritted his teeth, grabbed his bow, knocked an arrow, and shot. Whoosh! The arrow hit the sharp blade of Splitter and bounced off. The sudden attack attracted little Splitter's attention. The blood-red compound eyes on its carapace slightly rotated and locked on the young knight in the crowd. Suddenly, it pounced towards the young knight. Along the way, it brandished its sharp blade and chopped off the bodies of the knights who couldn't dodge in time. It was as easy as cutting tofu. Along the way, there were many bodies that were cut in half and miserable shrieks. It was like an Azura hell. The young knight, who had never seen such a ferocious monster, turned pale with fright and clutched the reins of his horse. Seeing the little Splitter coming straight at him, he gave a loud cry, pulled the reins, and turned his horse to run away. The well-trained war horse ran away in panic. Splitter chased after it. The distance between the two was getting shorter and shorter. In the blink of an eye, Splitter had caught up with it. It squeaked angrily and thrust its sharp blade-like limbs into the horse's tail. Splitter's tail was pierced into the horse's body. The healthy horse neighed in pain, raising its front hooves high in the air as it cried out miserably. Splitter quickly pulled out its sharp blade and completely tore the wound open. Intestines and blood flowed out. The warhorse was too injured. It fell down with a painful neigh. Splitter ignored the warhorse and pounced on the young knight on the ground. The young knight looked at the ferocious and huge body. He was so scared that his hair stood on end. He regretted it. He never thought that it would be such a ferocious monster that smuggled over. If he had known, he wouldn't have chased after them, even if he was beaten to death. Whoosh! In desperation, he waved his sword to resist, but only managed to parry the two sharp blades of Splitter. The other blades on Splitter's back pierced through the young knight's shoulders, head, neck, thighs, and other parts of his body like seaweed. He died instantly. He didn't even have time to let out a scream. Splitter roared and pounced on the young knight's body. It roared and gnawed on the young knight's body. The surrounding knights of light fled in fear as they saw the scene. In the blink of an eye, there were only a few knights whose bodies had been chopped off. They were wailing in pain and rolling on the ground. Some of them had been chopped off from the abdomen. They clenched their teeth in pain and used their hands to crawl on the ground to hide in the bushes. Dean shook his head as he saw that the battle was over. He glanced at the battlefield and bent down to pick up a few stones from the ground. He aimed at the seriously injured figures who were trying to sneak into the grass to hide. He threw the stones at them. Puff, puff, puff. The stone flew out and pierced through the head of the knight who had just crawled into the grass. The knight's helmet was dented, and he didn't make any sound. Several survivors were killed by Dean. Splitter heard the movement and turned its head to look at Dean. It roared in anger. It abandoned the young knight, who was bitten on the face and chest, and rushed towards Dean. Dean pulled the chain of the cage and continued to run. There was no Splitter in the cage, so it didn't take much effort to pull the chain. Nevertheless, the distance between him and Splitter was getting closer. Dean stopped after running for 700 or 800 meters. He saw Splitter chasing after him. His mouth curved into a smile. He grabbed the iron frame of the cage as he looked at Splitter. The latter was like a train that was rushing at full speed. Dean clenched his fingers. He turned around and rotated the cage as the Splitter rushed towards him. The twisting force caused by his feet and waist pulled the cage horizontally. He swung the cage 180 degrees and hit the Splitter. Bang! The opening of the cage was aimed at the Splitter. The Splitter's body crashed into the cage. At the moment of impact, Dean swung the inertia of the cage and his body was deflected. He rolled on the ground 7 or 8 times before coming to a stop. While rolling, Dean pressed the door of the cage and fastened the lock. When the cage stopped rolling, Dean stepped on the tungsten steel column and jumped back, stepping on the tungsten steel chain on the ground. Squeak! The little Splitter got up again when it finished rolling. Seeing that it was locked in this damn cage again, it couldn't help but let out an extremely loud and angry roar. Dean bent down to pick up the tungsten steel chain from the ground. He dragged the cage and continued to walk. The little Splitter fiercely struggled in the cage and screamed in anger. Dean didn't care as he dragged the little Splitter and ran through the grass. 10 minutes later, Dean once again saw the towering giant wall. He saw a little fire in front of the giant wall. He quietly approached it and saw that it was the entrance to the giant wall. There was a team of Knights of Light standing guard outside the entrance. Scott Consortium, it's you. Dean narrowed his eyes. The entrance to the giant wall wasn't the one he rented, but the one belonging to the Scott Consortium. It was the only entrance that he could safely transport Splitter to the area outside the giant wall. Whoosh! Dean dropped the chain and took the dagger. He pulled out a piece of black cloth and covered his face. Dean rushed over after getting close to a certain distance. Who is it? Stop! There's an enemy attack. Send a message. The Knights of Light who were guarding the entrance were scared as they saw the masked figure jump out. But their reaction wasn't slow. They quickly formed a circle and stared at Dean with their swords and shields. Dean quickly rushed over. When he was about 7 or 8 meters away, he suddenly threw the dagger. The dagger pierced through the forehead of Knight. The latter didn't have time to react. He didn't have time to move the shield to his head, so he suddenly fell down. Kill! Several knights roared and rushed over. Dean raised his hand and grabbed a spear that was stabbing towards him. His body rotated and his arms exerted strength. He lifted the spear and swept it towards the surrounding people. The knight was shocked, as he didn't expect the strength of the enemy to be so fierce. He let go of the spear. At the same time, Dean grabbed the spear and swept it like a dragon. The spear instantly pierced the throat of a knight and hit the shield of another knight. The heavy force pressed on the shield, and the knight fell to the ground. He knelt in front of Dean. Dean pushed the spear with his arm and quickly rushed out. The spear swung away the attacks from the surrounding people. He flew up and kicked the man's shield. Bang! The man's body flew out and fainted on the ground. Dean waved the spear and quickly killed. In the blink of an eye, the 8 knights on duty fell down. There was a huge difference in physique between the two sides. They didn't have the strength to fight back. Dean came to the knight who was stabbed by the dagger. He pulled out the dagger from the forehead of the knight and put it into the scabbard on his leg. He didn't throw away the spear in his hand. He turned back to the cage, pulled the chain, and dragged the cage to the front of the passage. He used the tip of the spear to open the heavy iron gate on the ground. He dragged the cage to the other side of the passage and climbed out. As soon as he came out, Dean heard a surprised voice. He couldn't help but frown. He turned around and saw 3 figures sitting around a campfire. They were warming themselves. At the moment, all of them were looking at him. They seemed to be surprised by the sudden opening of the passage. Lord Hunter. One of the stronger teenagers saw Dean's dress and was startled for a moment. There was a trace of excitement in his eyes. He immediately got up and trotted over. He respectfully said, "Greetings, Mr. Hunter. I'm Lorien, scavenger of Consortium." Chapter 425. Mr. Hunter. Mr. Hunter. At this time, the other 2 people who were sitting near the campfire also ran over. They were a charming girl and a middle-aged man. They saw Dudian dressed in black armor and bowed their heads respectfully. Dudian didn't pay attention to them, but stared at the sturdy boy. There was a trace of thinking in his eyes. Suddenly, he thought of a person and couldn't help but be startled. His mood was a bit complicated. Lorien, this name was often heard when he was in the scavenger special training. Lorien was one of the members who trained with him. Lorien's performance was second only to him. Lorien was not convinced of him and often compared with him. He vaguely remembered that among all the students, Lorien was the first to be selected by a consortium. And the consortium that selected him was the Scott Consortium. He didn't expect that a few years would pass in the blink of an eye. Unexpectedly, he would unexpectedly meet an acquaintance here. "Mr. Hunter, are you out to perform a task?" Lorien saw that Duddy and kept looking at him. He was a bit nervous and cramped, but he still asked in a flattering tone. His voice had just fallen when the sound of metal colliding echoed in the passage. Dean took back his thoughts. He saw the surprised look on the faces of several people. He sighed in his heart. His fingers hooked the dagger in the scabbard on his thigh and quickly cut it. Blood appeared on Lorien's throat. Dudian's sudden move shocked the 3 people. Lorien felt the pain in his throat and immediately covered his neck. He felt warm blood overflow from a wound. His heart couldn't help but panic. He pressed the wound and slowly retreated. He looked at Dudian in front of him in fear. "Sorry, you can only blame your bad luck." Dean sighed and slowly said. Lorien's eyes widened as he slowly fell down and lost his breath. The girl and the middle-aged man next to him were scared and stunned on the spot. Puff! Puff! Dean didn't wait for the 2 to speak. The dagger quickly stabbed out, and a bloody hole appeared on their throats. They stared in horror and fell down. Dean put the dagger into the scabbard and pulled out Splitter from the chain. He looked at the 3 bodies on the ground. His mood was a bit complicated. In the past, he had killed strangers, so he didn't have too deep feelings. But tonight, he had killed an acquaintance from his childhood. Although the latter often compared himself with him, but he didn't do anything too bad. But now he had died in his hands. Creak! Splitter smelled the blood and struggled in the cage. Dean retracted his gaze and dragged it along the giant wall. The dark night was silent. The sound of insect could be faintly heard in the weeds. Roars could be heard in the distance. The sound were hoarse and trembling, making strange sounds that made one's scalp go numb. Dean dragged the chain step by step. Slowly, as he walked for a long time, his mind gradually recovered from Lorien's death. From time to time, he would check the surrounding terrain to identify the direction. If you want to go to the Splitter's Cave from outside the Scott Giant Wall, you will need to bypass the third area. The monsters in the third area of the Scott Consortium are generally level 15 to 23. You will need a senior hunter to ensure your safety. Dean's eyes lit up as he dragged the chain along area number 3. Soon he came to a ruin. The asphalt road on the ground had long been cracked and covered with weeds. There were ruins on both sides of the asphalt road. They were as quiet as skeletons in the night. Pythons and lizards crawled from time to time. Clang, clang. The cage rolled on the ground, making a loud noise. Whoosh! A giant cat-like monster came from the dark. It jumped on a moss-covered car-shaped object. The top of the object cracked. The monster lightly jumped out and landed on the ground. It stared at Dean. Dean recognized that it was a difficult monster called Copperclaw Cat. It was a level 19 monster. It was very flexible. It could annihilate an intermediate hunter team if it was caught off guard. The little splitter in the cage seemed to feel the hostility. It suddenly stood up and roared in a low voice. The Copperclaw Cat retracted its claws when it heard the roar. It hesitated for a moment, but suddenly turned around and jumped into the nearby ruins. It disappeared into the night. Dean was surprised. He didn't expect that these bloodthirsty and ferocious monsters would know fear. Squeak, squeak. Splitter scared the copper-clawed cat away, but it still roared in the direction it had gone. It's quite awe-inspiring. Dean chuckled as he pulled the chain and continued to move forward. Splitter turned its head and roared at Dean. Dean continued to move forward as if he hadn't heard the roar. Splitter screamed a few times. It was full of anger as it saw that Dean ignored it. Splitter's voice stopped after a few minutes as it saw that Dean didn't pay attention to it. From time to time, it would hit the cage and vent its dissatisfaction. More than 2 hours later, Dean crossed the entire area number 3 and arrived at his own territory. He encountered a lot of monsters along the way. Some were scared away by the roar of Splitter, while others were killed by Dean. It was easy for him to kill monsters below level 25 with his current combat power. Dean came to the cave of Splitter after another hour. "I'm taking you home." Dean looked at the little Splitter in the cage and said. Splitter roared at Dean as it heard his voice. Dean clapped his hands as he looked at the entrance of the cave. He was relieved, although there were layers of boulders, but he could still see the amazing heat coming out of the boulders. It was obvious that Splitter was still alive. He looked at it for a while, then turned away. It didn't take long for Dean to come to the entrance of the giant wall. He saw a huge cage standing near the entrance. It was the big cage that he had asked Sergei to transport. The size of the cage was bigger than the entrance of the passage. It was made of loose materials, but the connection was firm. It wasn't worse than a directly welded cage. Duddian was relieved to see that the cage was still there. He grabbed the cage and put it on his back. He went back to Splitter's cave and put down the cage. He picked up a few boulders and wrapped them around the chain. He looked at Splitter. "Be obedient and I'll change your place." Squeak! Splitter roared in anger. Dean smiled and turned to the entrance of the cave. He lifted the boulder and saw that Splitter was still lying inside the cave. It had been half a month, but its body had become extremely sturdy. Its length was about 6 or 7 meters. It was twice the size of Splitter in the small cage. The cave was filled with a pungent stench and rotten smell. Dean held his breath as he jumped into the cave. He grabbed Splitter's body and dragged it out. The Splitter's wound had been smeared with lime by Dean, but it didn't regenerate its limbs. At the moment, only a bare body was left. It looked like a moth with its wings torn off. The carapace on its body was soft. The color of the carapace was white. It seemed that it was affected by the moisture on the ground and had developed deformities. Splitter opened its mouth to bite Dean as it saw Dean approach. Dean easily subdued it and carried it to the big cage outside the cave. Bang! Bang! Splitter kept struggling as it hit the tungsten steel pillar of the big cage. Dean looked at Splitter. "It's your turn." It was the first time for Splitter to see its companion. It was quiet as it heard Dean's voice. It was as if it was awakened and angrily shouted again. Dean didn't pay attention to its roar. He used the spear to force it to the other side of the small cage. He moved the small cage to the front of the big cage. The door was facing the big cage. He pulled the bolt of the cage and quickly turned to hide. He waved the spear and pierced the cage. Splitter was forced to dodge. It smashed open the door of the cage and rolled into the big cage. Dean kicked open the door of the small cage and grabbed the door of the big cage to close it. Splitter screamed as it saw the exposed door. It wanted to rush out of the big cage, but it was too late. The door was half closed. Dean used his spear to pin it down. At the same time, he used all his strength to push and bolt the door. He used one hand to resist the sharp blade of Splitter, while the other hand put the bolt on the big lock. Dean sat down. He was sweating profusely. Bang! Splitter slammed the door of the big cage violently, but the door of the big cage was heavy, and there was a huge Splitter lying inside. Its slamming only made the cage shake slightly, but it didn't have any effect on it. Whether or not you can survive in the future would depend on your own luck. Dean looked at the struggling Splitter and said. He didn't care whether Splitter could understand or not. He spent a lot of effort to move the Splitter because he knew that there would be few opportunities for him to hunt outside the giant wall in the future. He planned to enter the inner wall to peep at the pinnacle of the world after the lecture. He wanted to unravel the many mysteries in his heart. He also wanted to find a way to deal with the military and the Holy Church. The foundation of these two forces was in the inner wall. Even if he destroyed the military and the Holy Church in the outer wall, it was difficult to guarantee that the inner wall wouldn't send forces to suppress him. The cruel isolation of the high wall made him know that there was a sky beyond the sky. Therefore, if he wanted to climb to the sky, he would have to break the sky beyond the sky. Otherwise, all the glory would turn to dust. The cave of Splitter was located in the middle of his domain. If he wanted to raise Splitter, he would have to ask Sergei to take care of it or let it find its own food. Chapter 426. Dean was near the cave. He relied on thermal vision to capture some monsters that came out to forage at night. He slaughtered them and brought them back to the cage. He threw 2 sickle zombies into the cage. The sickle zombies were large enough to fit directly into the cage. Their heads weren't chopped off. Dean threw them into the cage. They roared and rushed towards the Splitter. The little Splitter was frightened at first, but soon it was angry as if its dignity was insulted. It rushed forward, and the 2 sickle zombies were quickly chopped into pieces by its sharp limbs. Dean looked at them and threw the lower bodies of the 2 sickle zombies a few meters away from the cage. Then he killed the other prey and placed them more than 10 meters away from the cage. Dean clapped his hands and looked at Splitter, who was roaring in the cage. He didn't stay any longer and left. The sky was beginning to dawn. Dean moved forward at full speed. He met some monsters along the way, but he was too lazy to pay attention to them. The monsters chased him crazily, but they couldn't catch up with Dean after chasing for more than 10 miles. They slowly abandoned their prey. In front of the giant wall, Dean took off his armor. The sticky, transparent wings on his back gently stretched out and slightly trembled. He felt his body slowly float up. Immediately, his feet stepped on the giant wall. With the help of the wings, he ran up the giant wall. The more he ran, the faster he ran, faster than on the ground. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, Dean ran to the giant wall. He felt that his chest was frozen. He folded his wings and quickly put on his armor. His body shivered slightly, but soon it was warm again. He continued to run along the giant wall. Half an hour later, he came to a corner. He continued to run along the corner. According to the map, the giant wall of Sylvia was square like the ancient city walls of the Celestial Empire, except that there were no watchtowers or signal towers. Dean suddenly came up with an idea. It seemed that he could sneak into the inner wall directly from the top of the giant wall. This idea made him excited, but he calmed down after thinking about it. He knew nothing about the inner wall. Even if he could sneak into the inner wall, it would be meaningless. Moreover, there were people like the Dragon Girl in the inner wall. If he was careless and provoked someone, then his identity would be exposed. The gains wouldn't make up for the losses. He gradually saw a vast and magnificent building. He was shocked as he looked down for the top of the giant wall. He had a bird's-eye view of the entire landscape from the top of the giant wall. The stronghold that they had just passed was like a black dragon that stretched into the distance. Behind the stronghold was a vast suburb filled with desolate villages. At this moment, in some of the villages, they could see some dark-skinned barbarians walking around, holding crude weapons. Clearly, they were the low-ranking barbarian soldiers. Behind these suburbs was the Golden Wall. At this moment, the sky was dimly lit, and there were already countless ant-like black dots moving about on the Golden Wall. They were all the wall builders. There were neatly arranged buildings behind the Golden Wall. It was the southernmost scenery of the commercial district. Dean looked up to the front. There were densely packed buildings extending into the distance. At the end of the buildings, there was a giant wall in the hazy mist. It was the high wall of the inner wall area. It had a history of more than 200 years. Its height was more than half of the giant wall of Sylvia. It was said that countless wall builders had died during the construction of the inner wall. The project was extremely huge. Dean's heart was moved. He didn't want to sneak in for the time being. He just wanted to peep at the scenery of the inner wall from the giant wall of Sylvia. Wouldn't it be good? He didn't want to enter the inner wall in the future. Thinking of this, he made up his mind and immediately continued to run forward. More than an hour later, the huge gray outline in Dean's eyes finally became clear. He crossed the entire width of the outer wall and came to the inner wall. He had been running at full speed for more than an hour. With the help of the wings, his speed was 5 times faster than the fastest horse. He was so tired that his whole body was drenched in sweat. The soft layer of the armor was soaked. Fortunately, the soft layer had the effect of absorbing sweat, so he didn't get wet. Who? Dean gasped for breath as he leaned on the giant wall to rest. He looked at the wall of the inner wall. The wall was extremely tall. It cut off the entire outer wall from north to south. It was like a huge gate. The width of the inner wall was about 40 to 50 meters. It was 3 times wider than the most prosperous street in the commercial district. The ground was shrouded in the shadow of light behind the high wall. It was a vast forest overgrown with weeds. In the distance, there were lakes, sandy lands, and tall mountains. But as far as the eye could see, there was no sign of a village within a dozen miles. It was extremely spacious. Dean was startled as he looked at it. In his impression, the inner wall should be an extremely prosperous and lively place. The scenery was beautiful. The top people of the giant wall lived there. Even the aristocrats, like the Mel family, were expelled from the inner wall. It could be seen that the people in the inner wall were the elites of the elites. However, this desolate scene subverted his worldview. Dean suppressed the doubts in his heart and continued to run forward. The closer he got, the clearer it became. Dean ran to the opposite line of the inner wall. He looked at the straight wall. The Golden Wall was more than 30 meters high. It was like a small threshold. It was not even a threshold. It could only be regarded as a small wrinkle. Behind the high wall was a vast plain. The plain stretched very far. There were mountains at the end. There seemed to be snow on the top of the mountain. There were lakes in the plain, but there were no villages or towns. Dean found it inconceivable that such a large area was empty. Even the most dilapidated slums in the outer wall wouldn't have such a large area that was empty. He suddenly thought of the shape on the map. The shock in his eyes slowly calmed down. The soil of the entire giant wall was occupied by the inner wall. Nearly 80% of the soil was in the inner wall, but the outer wall and the radiation area only accounted for 20%. This vast plain was a rare territory in the outer wall, but in the inner wall, perhaps it was a relatively unvisited wasteland. Dean decided to move forward. After walking for a while, Dean suddenly saw a huge shadow galloping in the grassland at the end of the plain. Behind the shadow, there was a very small sesame-like black grain chasing after it. Dean suddenly saw that the shadow in front of him was actually a huge monster that was more than 10 meters long. Its body was like a centipede with countless side feet, and its tail was high up like a scorpion with barbs. The person chasing the centipede monster turned out to be a very young boy, about 16 or 17 years old, almost the same age as Dean. His face still had the childish look of a teenager, holding a huge sword in his hand, chasing the centipede monster at full speed. Centipede. Dean was surprised. This was a level 22 monster. Moreover, it was a highly toxic monster. It was extremely difficult to deal with. Even an intermediate hunter would die if they encountered it. Even senior hunters wouldn't be willing to hunt this thing. If they were careless and got poisoned, most of the antidote would be difficult to save. Whoosh! All of a sudden, the youth chasing after it threw out a chain, clamping down on the barbs at the end of the 100-legged devil centipede's tail, pulling it back. The centipede struggled and swung its tail. It turned around and rushed towards the boy. The boy was holding a huge knife that was half the height of his body. He jumped up and stepped on the centipede's body. He cut a huge wound on the centipede's body. One man and one beast fought together. After a moment, the boy threw the huge knife and the centipede's head was cut off. The centipede suddenly stopped struggling. Its body slightly twisted. Dean was shocked. He didn't think that the people of the inner wall would be so strong. It was the first time that he saw someone of the same age as him. The boy pulled out the huge knife and tied the chain to the centipede's tail. He dragged the centipede away. Dean immediately followed the boy. He wanted to peep at the place where the boy lived. Suddenly, the boy stopped and looked back at the sky. Dean was shocked when he saw him turn his head. He quickly shrank his body and hid under the edge of the giant wall. After a moment, he pulled out the dagger and wiped it clean. He raised it slightly and looked at the boy with the help of the reflection from the side of the dagger. Although the image of the metal object was blurred, especially from a distance of a kilometer, he could see the boy standing quietly on the ground without any movement. Chapter 4:27. Dean was relieved as he saw the youth turn around and continue to drag the centipede. He didn't expect the youth's senses to be so sensitive. He didn't know what would happen if the youth saw him. He also didn't know what kind of status the youth had in the inner wall. What level of strength did the dragon girl belong to in the inner wall? What surprised him the most was that there were monsters in the inner wall. Wasn't it similar to the outer wall? How could the monsters come to the inner wall? Wasn't it easy to annihilate the monsters in the inner wall with the strength of the dragon girl? He couldn't think of a reason, but he was glad that he hadn't rashly gone against the light church and the military. Otherwise, if he had forced these two forces into a corner, who knew what kind of trouble it would have brought? As the saying goes, if you want to deal with the Holy Church and the military, then you have to find a way to control their strength in the inner wall. There were some doubts in his heart as he thought of this. The last barbarian attack had put the commercial district in danger. The military should have asked for reinforcements from the inner wall, but there was no response from the inner wall. Did the inner wall not care about the life and death of the outer wall? Or did the military not ask for reinforcements from the inner wall? Did they have other cards up their sleeves? However, there was another possibility. It was that the barbarians did something so that the inner wall didn't send reinforcements, but meant that the barbarians could contact the inner wall. There was a big background behind them. However, the barbarians lived in the radiation zone and the inner wall. There was an outer wall area between them. It was difficult to get in touch with the people in the inner wall. Perhaps it was the barbarians from the inner wall that colluded with the barbarians. But there were more problems. Dean frowned. He felt that the problem was a bit complicated and thorny. He thought of a person that he had missed, Yvette, who was imprisoned in the military. Dean looked up at the boy who was far away. He thought about it and put away the idea of continuing to follow him. At the moment, the sun had risen and it was not early. He should go back. Moreover, with his current ability, it was not difficult to climb the giant wall. In the future, there would be opportunities to come back and see. Gwyneth was waiting at the station. She leaned on the carriage and covered her face with a straw hat. Dudian hadn't returned after one night. She was puzzled. Although she had become Dudian's maid, she still felt that it was difficult to understand the boy. The latter always seemed to hide something from her, so she couldn't understand his real cards. Suddenly, a smell drifted over. Gwyneth lifted the straw hat and looked at Dudian. She put on the straw hat and indifferently said, "Are we going back now? There's no hurry. Let's eat something first." Dean peeled off the tarpaulin in his hand. There were several pieces of bread inside. He took out one and put it in his mouth. He handed the rest to Gwyneth. Eat. Gwyneth was startled. She took one of them and said, I can't eat so much. You don't need to lose weight. You're already beautiful. Dean casually said a famous phrase and smiled. He handed the tarp to her and turned around to get into the carriage. Gwyneth was startled as she heard Dean's words. She silently put away the pieces of bread and shook the rope. The horse was startled and immediately neighed and ran away. As soon as he came to the front of the castle, Dean saw that the gate was surrounded by reporters from various newspapers. He could not help but raise his eyebrows. Suddenly, he thought of something. There were 3 days left before his lecture. It was estimated that the aristocratic circle of the entire commercial district was paying attention to every move here. Many people with better eyesight noticed the carriage. They withdrew from the gate like a swarm of ants. They moved towards the carriage. Gwyneth's expression was indifferent. She didn't have the slightest intention to slow down. She shook the rope, and the carriage rushed forward at a faster speed. The people who came to encircle Dean were scared and hurriedly moved to the side. Although the interview was profitable, but their lives were the most important. Moreover, if they were injured or killed by Dean's hooves, they wouldn't be able to receive compensation for their injuries. Not to mention that the genius master would use his life to compensate for their injuries. Noyce, who was guarding the gate, saw the carriage and opened the gate. The carriage rushed into the manor and stopped in front of the castle. Dean got off the carriage and shook his head as he heard the shouts from outside the manor. He entered the castle. Master, you're back. Crone greeted him. Dennis and Glenn were sitting in the hall. They were enjoying breakfast. They got up and greeted Dean when they saw him. He went upstairs to change his clothes. He put on a soft and warm sweater and went back downstairs. He looked at Glenn, who had finished breakfast. Go to the military and help me bring back a person. Her name is Yvette. She is the barbarian royal family member that I have arrested. The military has promised to hand her over to me after the interrogation. This is my medal. He handed his knight medal to her. Glenn was surprised. She didn't think that Dean's power was so big that he could get the barbarian royal family from the military. But she was relieved as she thought about the fact that Dean had donated the legendary item for free. She nodded. I'll go now. Dean nodded and sat at the table. He called Crone to serve the meal. After 10 minutes, a sumptuous breakfast was served on the table. Dennis was speechless when he saw the ingredients of the breakfast. He didn't think that Dean would eat so extravagantly, even though he lived in such a simple house. Dean felt a lot warmer after breakfast. The biting cold feeling was dispelled. He went back to the study room to study the medical knowledge and exercise the flexibility of his left hand. He suddenly thought of the teenager he saw in the morning. He called Crone. Go and send a message to the old man. Tell him to buy parasitic soul worms from the temple or the black market. The more precious, the better. Dudian commanded. Now that he had power and wealth, he didn't need to personally go outside the giant wall to hunt. He only needed to spend money to buy them. Not only could he pick the type of parasitic soul worm that he liked, but the efficiency was also high. Outside the giant wall, to encounter a named monster, all depended on luck. Sometimes, he would squat for a few months, and he might not be able to find one. As for rare monsters, the probability was even lower. Yes, young master. Crone thought for a while and was ready to leave. Wait. Dean stopped him. By the way, tell the old man to spread the news that I need parasitic soul worms. If other nobles are willing to provide rare parasitic soul worms, then they will have the opportunity to get a place as my student. If they provide rare parasitic soul worms, then they will get a place as a student, and I will cultivate them wholeheartedly. Crone was startled for a moment. His eyes flickered as he replied, I know. Afternoon. Dennis came back with a tall woman with wheat-colored skin. There was a big difference between the women in the giant wall. The barbarians in the radiation zone were generally tall and burly. Even the women were no exception. Yvette's height was the same as most regular knights. She was about 1.75 meters. Compared with the women in the giant wall, she was almost a crane in a flock of chickens. Even most of the men in the giant wall didn't have such a height. In addition to the figure, the skin color was also very different. Even the women in the slums, who didn't bathe all year round, didn't have such a skin color. Although the body was dirty but at least the face could be seen. Yvette obviously had a problem with her skin color. Chapter 428. Master, the person you want has been brought back. Dennis said. Dean nodded and turned to go upstairs, send her to my study room. Yes, Master. Dennis nodded. Dean came to the study room not long after. Dennis sent Yvette up. Master, is there anything else you want me to do? You go back first. Tell the others to leave too. Don't come close or disturb me. Dean sat on the sofa as he poured tea. Dennis nodded and gently closed the door. Only Dean and Yvette were left in the study room. Dean poured 2 cups of tea and glanced at Yvette. He saw her numb expression and dull eyes. She didn't say a word. She just stood there in a daze. He smiled and said in English, Don't pretend. Come and sit down. Yvette's expression was wooden. She didn't respond. Dean raised his eyebrows. He raised his hand and waved it in front of her. He was about to open his mouth when Yvette suddenly reached out her hand towards Dean's throat. Dean's eyes lit up. He leaned back and hit her shoulder. Her body was pushed back and hit the door. Dust fell off the doorframe. Yvette didn't hit him. She waved her hands and rushed towards Dean. Her fingers were like claws. Dean waved his arm and blocked one of her hands. He leaned sideways and cut into her chest. His shoulder hit her and pushed her back again. Dean didn't wait for her to stand firm. Dean's palm swept past her cheek and grabbed her throat. He tightened his grip. Do you want to die? Yvette's raised arm stopped. Her eyes were full of resentment as she stared at Dean. You want to sneak attack me? Even if you kill me, you will die. Dean's expression was cold. Moreover, you won't be able to kill me with your strength. Yvette bit her lips. Blood seeped out. She didn't notice it. She was still staring at Dean with resentment. She was like a beast that wanted to devour people. Hate me? Dean's face was cold. He didn't have the slightest sympathy. I don't care what you think in your heart. You have to follow my rules, unless you want to suffer 10 times more pain and humiliation. As he spoke, he slowly released his fingers. His gaze was as cold as a sword as he looked at Yvette's eyes that were filled with resentment. Yvette bit her lower lip as she heard Dean's words. She stared at Dean. Her eyes were full of hatred, resentment, anger, and faintly there was a trace of fear. Dean turned back to the sofa and sat down. He pointed to the opposite side and said, Come and sit. Yvette clenched her teeth. Her hands trembled as if she was trying to restrain and endure. She slowly sat on the sofa opposite to Dean and stared at him. What? Are you mute? Or did they cut off your tongue? Dean picked up the teacup and handed it to her. Yvette's chest violently rose and fell. Her fingers were slightly clenched. Her eyes seemed to pop out of their sockets as she stared straight at Dean. Dean leaned back on the sofa and sneered. You haven't learned anything else, but you have learned how to pretend to be mute. If you have the strength to hate me, then you might as well beg me. Maybe I can help you get revenge by killing the people who whipped you and humiliated you. When Yvette heard the word rape, her body slightly trembled. A trace of fear flashed through her angry and resentful eyes. Her face also paled a little. She slowly lowered her head. No one could see her expression. After a moment, her voice was hoarse and full of resentment as she said word by word, All of this is because of you. Dean indifferently said, If you know how to blame yourself for your stupidity, then at least you can make some progress in the future. If you continue to blame others, then you will only become a resentful woman. You should have known your fate when I captured you. You didn't have the courage to commit suicide. I saved your life. In the end, you shouldn't hate me, but thank me. Yvette looked up with red eyes. If you didn't say that you would save my life, then I would have already committed suicide. I wouldn't have been humiliated by you. Dean indifferently said, You can't take revenge by committing suicide. Yvette bitterly looked at him. What do you want? Can you help me? Will you help me? Whether I will help or not depends on your attitude. Dean picked up the tea and drank. At least I can't see that you are begging me. Yvette almost spat out a mouthful of blood. She was so angry that she lowered her head and gritted her teeth. You saved my life because you want to get some secrets from me. Even if I know, I won't tell you. Duddian slowly said, Look at me first. Yvette was startled as she looked at Dean. Her eyes were still full of hatred. Dean raised a finger. First, As a member of the giant wall, I have to capture you since you have invaded our territory. This is my duty. Secondly, I promise to keep your life after I sent you to the military. Now that you're still alive, I've done what I said I would do. Third, there is no mouth in this world that I can't pry open. I can apply the military's means to you 100 times more. Dean suddenly smiled. In addition, I want to remind you that even if you commit suicide, it will still be valuable for me. I can dissect your body and peel off your skin to see if your bones are the same as those of the people inside the giant wall. I can transport your flesh and blood to your tribe so that they can taste it. Oh, and your head. Your facial features are so delicate. I can empty your brain and make it my chamber pot. Yvette looked at the teenager's smiling expression. She couldn't help but feel a chill in her heart. Are you threatening me? Dean shook his head. Why would I threaten you? I'm just telling you a fact. Even if you die, I believe that your tribe won't want to see your body being ruined by us. I can still get what I need. It's just a bit troublesome. I like efficiency. I hate any inefficient methods, so I don't want to do things that I hate. Do you understand? Yvette was so angry that her chest violently heaved up and down. She gritted her teeth and said, As long as you help me get revenge, I will tell you everything I know. But you have to help me kill those damn dwarf pigs first. It's better to save time. Why do you want to waste so much time? Dean smiled. The people who whipped you and raped you won't be able to run away. I'll solemnly introduce myself to you. My name is Dean. I have two main occupations. The first one is a master of the Temple of Elements. The second one is a golden knight of the Knight's Hall. So you can fully believe that your request is very simple for me. Yvette was startled. She was a member of the royal barbarian family who regarded the outer wall as an enemy since childhood. She was familiar with the two forces that Dean was talking about, but she couldn't believe that this teenager who looked younger than her had such a lofty status. Moreover, such a person would personally go to the battlefield. This is my knight's honor medal. This is the master medal. Dean took out two medals from his pocket and threw them on the table. I won't say anything more if you don't recognize this medal. Yvette was surprised as she recognized the knight's honor medal at first glance. She picked it up and carefully looked at it. She confirmed that it wasn't fake. She couldn't help but look at Dean in shock. You didn't lie? Dean said. Is it necessary to lie to a prisoner like you? Yvette's eyes twitched. She found out that the teenager's mouth was very poisonous. She took a deep breath. All right, I believe you. What do you want to know? I want to know everything that you know. Dean slowly said, By the way, I don't like troublesome people. I hope that you can tell me everything at once. Otherwise, I don't mind using hard means to force you to speak. I can guarantee that my means will be more effective than the military. At least I can find thousands of people to rape and humiliate you. But they won't be so bold. Yvette's expression changed as her eyes flickered. Dean faintly said, By the way, I'll tell you one more thing. You barbarians have been defeated and expelled from the Golden Wall. If you don't believe me, then I'll let my attendants take you to the Golden Wall to see the scenery there. In addition, I'll tell you one more thing. The reason why you barbarians were defeated was because I created a legendary weapon to expel you from the Golden Wall. Yvette's face changed color and said in shock, Impossible, we can't lose. I said that I can take you to verify it. There's no need to lie to you. Dean indifferently said, Now, the military is considering whether to attack the barbarians' headquarters. They're thinking about the loss of the war. I have a lot of weapons in my hands. I can help the military to completely exterminate your barbarians. But I don't want to do that. If you are willing to believe me, then I can give you a place in the outer wall in the future as long as you give me a few years. Moreover, no one will expel you from the outer wall. So, I hope you can be honest and be good to both of us. Chapter 429. The fragrance of tea filled the study room. Dean stared at Yvette as he asked all the questions in his mind. He listened to her answers while paying attention to her heart and the blood vessels in her body. He could clearly see the heartbeat of the latter under the thermal vision. This would help him to detect if she was lying. Inner wall? I don't know about it. Even if there is, I have no right to ask about it. Yvette replied honestly. Dean looked at her heartbeat. He nodded. All right, my questions are over. I didn't expect you to be the little princess of the barbarian royal family. I will take revenge for you. Biting her lips, Yvette's eyes flashed with a trace of resentment. I hope to kill them in the most vicious way possible. No problem. Dudeen readily agreed. Yvette stared at him. How do you know that they did that to me? Dean saw that there was a trace of shame in her voice. The coldness in his eyes softened a bit. I believe that any senior hunter would be able to smell the dirty smell on your body. Go take a bath. Yvette was startled and her face turned pale. She subconsciously covered her lower abdomen with her hands, but then she realized that this action was indecent. She gritted her teeth and said, I'll go first. Dudeen got up and opened the door. He called out to Crone in the corridor. Crone ran up. Master, take her to take a bath. Dean said, Yes. Crone immediately turned his head and said to Yvette, Miss, please. Dean's eyes lit up as he watched Yvette leave with Crone. According to Yvette, their ancestors came from the inner wall, but because of the war they were expelled to the outer wall. Later they were expelled to the radiation zone. They stayed in the radiation zone for more than 200 years. At that time, the giant wall of the inner wall was built. There are consortiums involved in the war. In addition to Melon Consortium, Huasheng, Green, and Scott Consortium are involved. The merchants won't move if there is no profit. There's no need to worry about the collapse of the inner wall. Dean narrowed his eyes. The military should be aware of this point, but they couldn't investigate it. If he didn't take the initiative, then the military wouldn't be able to bring down the Melon Consortium, even if they got the evidence. It seemed that there was a contradictory balance in the seemingly complex situation. Perhaps this was what the inner wall wanted. Unfortunately, Yvette was just a little princess of the king of barbarians. Although she was talented in fighting, in the barbarian social system, women were forbidden to participate in military discussions. According to her, although her father was the chief of all tribes and the king of all barbarians, there were more than 50 children of the king of barbarians. Yvette was ranked 27th among the daughters, and she had 5 younger sisters, the youngest of whom had just learned to walk. If she was a man, then she would be able to touch the top secrets of the barbarians. Time flew by. 2 days passed. In the blink of an eye, it was the day of Dean's public lecture. In the last 2 days, old Feline had sent the parasitic soul worms for Dean to choose from. There were 16 parasitic soul worms. Most of them were ordinary parasitic soul worms. They could be used as magic marks to become ordinary hunters. The transformation of the body was weak, and the increase in strength wasn't big. Moreover, their ability was relatively ordinary. They could make the body more resistant to heat or hunger, but their role in combat was negligible. In addition to the ordinary parasitic soul worms, there were 4 rare parasitic soul worms. They could be used as hunters. Dean was surprised that there was a rare parasitic soul worm among the 16 parasitic soul worms. This rare parasitic soul worm came from the swallower. It was at the same level as the magic marks of the infected. Its ability was to provide a strong digestive ability. Not only could it digest the flesh and blood of the undead, which contained viruses, but it could also digest the flesh and blood of poisonous monsters. Its intestines could be said to be immune to poison. It could eliminate most of the viruses, bacteria, and parasites. In addition, it could also digest metals, poisonous plants, bark, stones, and so on. Of course, he needed to reach the level of a senior hunter in order to evolve such a high-level ability. In addition to the terrifying digestive ability, the swallower magic mark also had a good attack effect. The strong acid in the stomach could be shot out through the tip of the tongue to attack the enemy. As long as it was an intestine devourer magic mark hunter, the tongue would gradually evolve into a hollow tube connected to the stomach and could use the strong acid in the stomach to make a sneak attack, which often had a miraculous effect in the battle. This is the swallower parasitic soul worm. I will give it to you, Noyce. Dean called Jean and handed him the gray parasitic soul worm. Train well in the future and learn from Sergei and Gwyneth. Now your starting point is the same as them. Noyce looked at the gray parasitic soul worm. Young master, this is a rare parasitic soul worm. I have my own magic mark. Dean laughed. It was a waste to use the rare parasitic soul worm as a promotion material. Ordinary parasitic soul worm was enough. Crone's expression turned ugly, but soon disappeared. He looked at Noyce and said, "Young master gave it to you. Take it." Noyce came back to his senses. He took the box and bowed. "Young master, you are the one who pulled my life out of prison. Scar and I swore allegiance to you. I will do the same in the future. No matter what you ask me to do, I am willing to die." Dadian laughed. "Well, then you should die now." Noyce almost choked. He looked up in shock. "Don't be so mushy. Go." Dean waved his hand. Noyce reacted and his face turned red. He saluted again and then left. Dean looked at Crone. Which family gave the swallower magic mark? Who was the person they recommended? Crone turned around and handed over the register in his hand. Dean took a look and wrote down the name. "You go out first. Tomorrow is the day of my lecture. Prepare for it." "Yes, young master." Crone looked at the 4 bottles of rare parasitic soul worms on the table. After he left, Dadian closed the window and added a few pieces of dry wood to the fireplace. Then he sat by the fireplace and took off his coat, exposing his upper body. His skin was as white as snow, but his body was covered with intricate whip marks and sharp blade scars. Some of the scars were shocking, especially the steel nail scars on his shoulder blade, which still left a round scar. His divinized magic mark was in the middle of these scars on his chest. It was like a sharp sword lying across his chest. Dean gently touched for a moment and picked up the parasitic soul worm next to him. He began to absorb the parasitic soul worm from the ordinary ones. He was already at the limit of intermediate level before he got the magic mark. His physique had reached the bottleneck. It was useless to absorb more God's blessings because the magic mark was connected to the body. God's blessings were not to strengthen the body, but to strengthen the magic mark. The magic mark had stages. When a stage reached saturation, it was necessary to use the body of other parasitic soul worms as nourishment to step into the next stage. Dean took out the ordinary parasitic soul worm from the bottle and injected it into the magic mark on his chest. 1, 2, 3. Chapter 430. In the blink of an eye, Dean injected 5 parasitic soul worms into the magic mark on his chest. The magic mark only bulged a little and then calmed down at a very slow speed. Dean raised his eyebrows. Generally, a hunter only needed 4 parasitic soul worms to promote from intermediate to senior level. If he was unlucky, 5 or 6 would be enough. Unless he was extremely unlucky, he needed 7 or 8 to satisfy his magic mark's appetite. Looking at his situation now, it seemed that he belonged to the category of extremely unlucky people. After injecting 5 parasitic soul worms, there was no feeling at all. Dean could only continue to inject. Anyway, with his current status, it was easy to get parasitic soul worms. He just needed to hook his finger and someone would send them to him. He didn't need to squat outside the giant wall to hunt for parasitic soul worms. If he didn't get the magic mark, he would become a monster's meal. 6, 7, 8, 9. With the ingestion of more and more parasitic soul worms, Dean finally felt a slight pulse in the magic mark on his chest. It seemed to be slightly trembling. This was a precursor of evolution. He was surprised and continued to inject parasitic soul worms. In a blink of an eye, he injected 2 parasitic soul worms. The magic mark on his chest trembled more and more intensely. At the same time, it emitted a heat that spread throughout his body. His body, which was originally cold, seemed to have warmed up under this hot current. It seems that it's not enough. Dean stared at the magic mark on his chest. He waited for a moment, but found no other movement. He couldn't help but be speechless. He was not extremely unlucky, but extremely unlucky. Was it because of the legendary magic mark? He looked at the remaining 4 rare parasitic soul worms and hesitated for a moment. Finally, he clenched his teeth and grabbed a bottle. He took out a green parasitic soul worm and injected it into his magic mark. Although using rare parasitic soul worms to promote his soul worm was an absolute wastrel, Dean didn't care so much. These things could be bought again. For him, He could easily exchange them for any kind of invention. If he continued to wait for others to send him ordinary parasitic soul worms, the time was too slow, and he was not sure someone would send them. And he never liked to wait. With the injection of this rare parasitic soul worm, Dean suddenly felt the heat in his chest boiling, as if he was suddenly ignited by a fire. His whole body felt a burning sensation, and his pores expanded, oozing out a lot of sweat. Dean took a light breath. He had this feeling that the breakthrough was imminent. He grabbed another bottle and took out a rare parasitic soul worm and injected it into his magic mark. Suddenly, his whole body felt like it was about to explode. He felt as if his brain had been hit by a volcano. His mind was full of heat, and his consciousness was blurred by this heat. However, he could vaguely feel that there seemed to be something twisting in his chest. When he felt this, he suddenly remembered the time when he had absorbed the Splitter's parasitic soul worm. The parasitic soul worm had tried to drill into his brain. Suddenly, his pores shrank, and his whole body was frightened. He looked down and saw that the shape of the magic mark on his chest was changing. If it was a small sword mark before, then now it was like a finger-long sword chopstick in the middle of his chest. The change of the magic mark meant that the promotion was successful. Dean took a deep breath. He felt that his whole body was hot, wet, and full of sweat. He pulled a towel next to him to dry his body. He felt that his hand was very light, as if his arms suddenly became thousands of pounds lighter. His thoughts moved, and his arms stretched out unexpectedly. I don't know if there are any new abilities after being promoted to senior hunter. There was a glimmer of expectation in Dean's eyes. Compared to his own physical increase, he was more looking forward to the new ability. If it was a better ability, the effect would be much greater than brute force. However, life was not a game after all. There was no attribute list. He could only slowly explore it. Fortunately, he had learned how to explore his own ability when he deified the magic mark last time. This time, he still did the same, starting from his eyes. When he was ready to experiment with his eyes, he suddenly found a strange thing. He could actually see the cabinet. He was facing the fireplace at the moment. The cabinet was behind him, but he could see it. Dean was startled and suddenly overjoyed. He turned his head and faced the cabinet. He suddenly saw the fireplace behind him, and the flame inside was strong. The angle of my field of vision has expanded. Dean touched his eyelids. It was incredible. He suddenly thought of something. He quickly ran to the mirror and looked at himself. In the mirror, his eyes were like a human's. They weren't protruding out. He was relieved, but soon he noticed that there was a very light green color in his eyes. This touch of green was in the middle of the pupil. Dean looked closer and blinked. Yes, there was a touch of green in both of his eyes. Sure enough, the structure of the eyeball has changed. Fortunately, it's not big. Dean was a little relieved. As the ability of the hunters improved, their body would be subtly changed by the magic marks. It could be said that any senior hunter would have a part of their body that was different from a human. For example, Sergei had scales on his back. This was the result of his steel dragon magic marks. As for the other hunters, some of them had extremely long teeth that were exposed outside their mouths like ferocious fangs. Some of them had oddly colored, brightly colored hair. Some of them had skin like crocodile skin, rough and hard. Some of them had fingers that were like beast claws, long and ugly. All of the hunters' bodies would change. As their strength increased, more and more parts of their bodies would change. Many of them had mutated parts on the surface which made them look like monsters. This was the reason why hunters always lived in the dark. They were rejected by the nobles and feared by the civilians. My vision is a bit like that of an insect, but the surface structure of the eyeball is still the same as that of a human. There is no protrusion, and the eyelids have not degenerated. Dean looked down at his body, looking for other parts of the mutation. When he concentrated, he suddenly found that his line of sight seemed to fall into a bloody world. Suddenly, the scene in front of him changed, and he saw a skeleton, and this skeleton was him. He was so shocked that he almost fell down. When he moved his gaze away from this strange scene, his mood calmed down a little, and his pupils seemed to relax. When he looked again, he suddenly found that the skeleton from before was gone, and it was still himself made of flesh and blood. Dean was startled for a moment. Suddenly, he was overjoyed. His vision seemed to have gone a step further. He could directly see the bone marrow. Moreover, the most important thing was that he seemed to be able to control his vision. It was not fixed like before. Otherwise, he would see everyone as a skeleton. It was no different from living in a kingdom of the undead. The most important thing was that he would get face blindness. The angle of sight seems to be more than 270 degrees. I can also see the skeletons inside the body. It belongs to the medium-high perspective ability, and I can control it freely. Dean was pleasantly surprised. It must be known that although a normal person's single-eye field of vision was about 150 degrees, the area where the two eyes overlapped was the area where people could see clearly. This area was 120 degrees. In most cases, people could only see clearly in the 90-degree range. The more focused the attention, the smaller the field of vision. Usually, when the attention was focused on one thing, the field of vision would be reduced to less than 1/5. Chapter 431. Splitter is an extreme attack-type monster. There is such a big change in vision. I guess the improvement in combat would be even stronger. Dean couldn't help but look forward to it. He tested smell and hearing one by one according to the previous experiment sequence. Through the experiment, Dean found that his hearing and smell were still confused. When he pinched his nose, he could distinguish the sourness, sweetness, bitterness, and spiciness of the smell through his hearing. When he blocked his ears, he could smell the sound emitted by the smell. It was not much different from before, but the intensity had increased. The range was nearly twice as wide as before. He could clearly smell the many smells mixed in the air and the subtle sounds from all over the castle, including a corner of the kitchen. There was a squeaking sound of something small gnawing on a hard object. It should be a mouse hiding there. Dean was disappointed that there was no new change in his hearing and smell. But after thinking for a while, he was relieved. Splitter was an extreme attack-type monster. Its high-speed movement and attack required keen vision. But the need for smell and hearing was not so strong. Dean moved his body. After the test, he found that his physical strength was more than twice as strong as before. His wrist strength and grip strength were surprisingly strong. He could easily bend hard metal tools out of shape. Generally, when an intermediate hunter is promoted to a senior hunter, my physical strength will double. Some of them will increase by 1.5 times. According to the Dragon Girl, an intermediate hunter can hunt monsters around level 11 to 19. A more powerful intermediate hunter can hunt monsters around level 20. A senior hunter can hunt monsters around level 28 or 29. When I was an intermediate hunter, I was able to easily kill a level 27 monster. I didn't even have to rely on close combat skills. This means that my physique can cope with a level 30 monster, which is the limit of a senior hunter. Now, I should be able to kill a level 40 monster. If I improve my combat skills, then I can kill a level 45 monster. Dean's eyes flashed. There was no modern punching machine here. He could only use the monsters outside the giant wall as a reference to evaluate his physical strength. But it was convenient. After all, the meaning of the existence of a hunter was to hunt monsters. It was more valuable to know the level of monsters he could kill than to know his specific strength. My magic marks are still at the senior hunter stage, but the increase in strength is far stronger than ordinary senior hunters. The Dragon Girl was sent to hunt level 68 mature Splitter. I am still far from her. However, if the magic mark evolves again, maybe I can barely catch up with her. The potential of a deified legendary magic mark is stronger than her, unless she also has a deified legendary magic mark. Thinking of this, the surprise in Dean's heart gradually calmed down. He looked down at his abdomen, and his pupils seemed to adjust slightly after being oppressed. Suddenly, he saw the bones and internal organs in his abdomen, as well as the white ice in his abdomen. However, in the range of 270 degrees of vision, he found that in addition to his abdomen, there was also a large piece of white ice in his left arm. The bones of his left arm seemed to be a bit transparent, like the structure of ice cubes. Seeing this, Dean was slightly surprised. Suddenly, he realized that perhaps the main reason for the abnormality in his abdomen came from his left arm. His abdomen was infected with a large amount of blood from other monsters. It was just a fuse that caused the changes in his abdomen. Otherwise, it was impossible to explain why his left arm turned into white ice while his right arm didn't have the slightest change. My left arm was directly absorbing the cold crystal. It was eroded by the cold and spread to my abdomen. So the ice blood disease should be caused by the direct absorption of the cold crystal. Dean fell into thought. After a long time, he slowly recovered his thoughts and looked down at his body. Previously, he saw that he was full of bones, so he didn't take a closer look. Now, he looked one by one and suddenly found that there were very strange changes in his body. First of all, the position and number of bones. He had seen the normal structure of human bones in the super chip, but his bones were somewhat deformed. It seems that there are 2 more forearm bones in my arm. The phalanges have become thinner, and there's a small phalange bone next to it. Dean looked at his body while trying to move his fingers. He grasped the bent metal tools next to him. Suddenly, he found that when he exerted force in his fingers, the small phalanges next to the phalanges were like a bracket supporting the phalanges, so that the phalanges could easily burst out a powerful force. Dean was startled and then came to his senses. No wonder I'm only a senior hunter, but my strength and speed are far beyond that of ordinary senior hunters. At the genetic level, I'm still a senior hunter, but the abnormal structure inside my body allows me to exert stronger strength and speed. Dean thought in his heart. The same material, different structure, played different effects. Compared to ordinary human beings, the structure of his body seemed to be much better. But these changes only enhanced the physique. It seems that there are no other combat abilities. Dean looked at his whole body in doubt. Splitter was a monster with extreme attack. But in addition to the obvious changes in vision, there didn't seem to be any other changes in combat. This feeling was a bit strange. In terms of ability, his senses had greatly improved. Compared to other senior hunters who were good at perception, he was in no way inferior or even stronger. But perception was only incidental to Splitter. Like other combat-type hunters, some could control blood. Some were like Glenn, who had black weaver magic marks. She could burrow into the ground and shrink pores to hide her breath. Some were like the infected, who could enhance their sense of smell and immunity, as well as the ability to absorb cold crystals and night vision. But for now, the Divine Eye's Splitter magic marks didn't give him many abilities, even fewer than the rare magic marks. Is it possible that the ability has evolved, but I haven't noticed it? Can't the ability be stimulated by ordinary tests? Dean thought in his heart. If this was the case, then maybe he would be able to stimulate the ability when he encountered a well-matched opponent. After all, some abilities would be instinctively displayed in times of crisis. Temple of Elements. Drudge Mountain. Blessed Forest. The castle extended from Mount Degia to the front of the forest. The outermost edge was the divine castle where the apprentice oracles and primary oracles lived. As the hierarchy continued to the front of the forest, the divine castle outside the forest was the divine castle of the deputy temple lord. It was magnificent, and the manor was vast. A large number of temple staff were taking care of the strange flowers and plants in the manor, as well as the strange trees. There was a lonely castle by the lake in the depths of the forest. It wasn't large, and the construction wasn't magnificent. There were some common fruits and vegetables planted in the manor. There was no staff of the temple to take care of them. There was an old man wearing ordinary linen clothes. He was carrying a kettle and was watering the manor. He was taking care of the vegetables. He was holding a small hoe in his hand. He was removing the weeds next to the vegetables. He looked like an old fruit farmer. Woo! Suddenly, a giant black shadow jumped out from the back of the manor and rushed towards the old fruit farmer. It was a giant leopard dog. It was nearly 3 meters tall and had strong limbs. There was no fat on its body. There were brown spots all over its body. There was a sharp horn on the top of its head. Its eyes were dark golden amber. It was full of killing intent. It moved as fast as lightning and arrived in front of the old fruit farmer in the blink of an eye. It opened its mouth, but didn't bite the old fruit farmer. Instead, it jumped in front of the old fruit farmer. It was like a watchdog as it roared towards the outside of the manor. The old fruit farmer was in the middle of weeding when he saw this. He paused for a moment and raised his blurry eyes to look outside the manor. Lightning Sprout. Wow, a rare monster has been tamed to such an extent. Good job of the temple master. A burst of applause echoed from the depths of the forest. A tall figure slowly came out from the shadows. Roar! The giant black beast let out a low roar, full of demonstration. The old fruit farmer put down the kettle and straightened his body. His previously dim eyes seemed to shoot out two rays of cold light. He slightly narrowed his eyes and calmly said, "The war is over. What do you want from the inner wall?" At this moment, the figure in the shadows had completely walked out. It was a handsome young man, holding a 2-meter-long wooden stick in his hand. He wore an extremely simple white robe, which was like a huge bedsheet, curling his body sideways. The hand and shoulder that held the stick were exposed outside the robe. He looked like a monk, but he had a head of elegant golden hair. Chapter 432. Roar! The black monster, the lightning sprout, saw the young man approaching it. It suddenly took a few steps forward and roared ferociously. Electric sparks appeared on its forehead, and all of its hair stood up like a sharp hedgehog. The young man's expression did not change, but a ray of light suddenly flashed in his eyes. The wooden stick in his hand gently knocked on the ground, making a light sound. He still seemed to be standing casually, but his posture was already stretched, as if he would attack at any time. The thunder sprout growled. Just as it was about to rush out, its body suddenly stopped, and its eyeballs moved back slightly. The old man who watered the vegetables earlier stroked the thunder sprout's fur and slowly walked out. "You want to bring a person?" The old man patted the lightning sprout and calmly looked at the youth. "Is it the child who has created a new legendary item?" The youth smiled and said, "I only know that his name is Dean." The old man stared at him and slowly retracted his eyes. He gently touched the ears of the lightning sprout. The lightning sprout screamed and jumped back into the manor. He is a real genius. Are you sure you want to kill him?" The old man turned around and slowly entered the fortress behind the orchard. The young man smiled, pushed open the door of the manor, and followed. He said, "This is the order of the higher-ups. This person used the power of the devil. If it wasn't for his good comprehension, I would have purified him. This time, I'm just sending him to the monastery to let him think about it. If he knows what's good for him, then if you want to take him, then take him." The old man interrupted him. His voice was emotionless as he said, "You'd better leave. I don't welcome outsiders here." The young man was slightly startled. One of his feet was in midair. He paused for a moment as he looked at the old man's gradually disappearing figure. After a moment of silence, he slowly retracted his foot, bowed slightly, and turned around to leave the manor. The sun rose. The warm sun shone on the church mountain. A new day had arrived. The bell echoed on the top of the mountain, pushing away the morning mist. On the steps at the foot of the mountain, a black that the size of an ant was moving forward. It was actually countless oracles of the divine hall dressed in luxurious clothes, walking the steps to the largest church castle in Mount Degia. Today was also the day that Dean announced to teach. It was 9 in the morning. It was 7 o'clock at the moment. All the architects got up and rushed to St. Peter's Cathedral. This was the place where the masters of the Temple of Elements gave their lectures. Since it was a public lecture, the lecture venue was the square in front of the cathedral. The square was very vast. It was 185 meters long and 160 meters wide. It could accommodate 100,000 people. There were a total of 108 towering pillars around the square. The statues of angels and goddesses were engraved on them, looking magnificent and magnificent. There were many people gathered in the square. Naturally, there weren't more than 100,000 architects from the Temple of Elements, but there were 20 or 30,000 of them. The more they stood in the front, the clearer they could hear. At the moment, they were scrambling for the most conspicuous position in the front. Not only could they hear Dean's words, but they could also be chosen by him. There are still 2 hours before the lecture starts, and there are already so many people here. I guess there are already more than 10,000 people. There was a trace of amazement in Ivis's eyes as he looked at the noisy scene. In the past, there were tens of thousands of people who came to listen to their master's public lectures. It was a big scene, and it was worth to be proud of in front of other masters. But now it was nothing compared to the scene in front of him. Today is his first public lecture, so it is inevitable that it will attract a lot of people. I estimate that at least 10,000 people will come. The total number of people in our temple is only around 30,000. He is going to become famous. A lean old man said with a complex expression. He was Arson who had a quarrel with Dean. Today, he came with his friend Ivissa to watch the lecture. Ivissa sighed. Even the 2 of us have come. If the little guys don't come, then they will be too unmotivated. Arson's mouth twitched. I want to see what he is going to say. Being able to create inventions doesn't mean that he can explain them. Teaching is a test of the accumulation of professional knowledge. He has just become a master, but he dares to teach in public. He is arrogant. If he had studied in the library for 3 years, then maybe he would have become a useful person. Ivissa knew that there was still resentment in his heart. He shook his head and whispered, he has already become a useful person. Arson choked, and his face darkened. Hey! At this time, a figure came from the side. It was a square-faced old man. He was wearing casual clothes. He smiled at the 2. You 2 old guys also came? Do you want to see his lecture? Ivissa looked up as he recognized the person. Master Peter, you have come. What's the reason for us not to come? Arson's face was still gloomy as he saw the old man. He turned his head and pretended not to notice. The square-faced old man walked over and said with a smile, if he hadn't said that he would teach 10 days in advance, I really wouldn't have the time to come. I've been busy for a long time for this day. Now, I brought a few of my good-for-nothing students here to take a look. Ivissa laughed. You are too polite. Carrie and Casper are senior architects. I estimate that it will take less than 2 years for them to become new masters. Your ability to teach students is the best among us. I'm flattered. The square-faced old man laughed. Arson frowned. It's useless to become a new master. If it wasn't for Dean, then they would be able to shine. But now that he has come out, the others will become foils. There was a trace of embarrassment on Ivissa's face. The square-faced old man's face slowly turned gloomy. He looked at Arson. I heard that you had a conflict with the legendary master. Why? You can't compete with him, so you want to pull us in? Arson's face changed as he didn't expect the old man to be so direct. He couldn't help but get angry. What nonsense are you talking about? Ivissa smiled awkwardly. It's just a joke. Don't take it seriously. The square-faced old man coldly snorted. Don't say a word. I'm not the one who started it. Some people are jealous of others because they can't compare with others. They don't work hard all day and are jealous of others. How dare they provoke me? Ridiculous. Arson angrily said. Who are you talking about? I'm jealous of him. When I became famous, he was still in his mother's womb. The square-faced old man sneered. You are old, yet you want to compete with a child. Do you know that he wasn't born when you became famous? But now that you're about to be buried, you've been surpassed by others. You. Arson's body trembled in anger. The square-faced old man looked at him with a face full of mockery. What are you 2 arguing about? A voice echoed from the side. A thin old man came over. It was Skagen. Ivissa saw him and quickly said, You persuade them. Skagen came over and looked at both of them. Today is the big day of Dean's lecture. We shouldn't make trouble here. We should be happy that new seeds are growing in the new season. We have a legendary master in the temple. He will drive the temple in the future and completely change the life of the outer wall. The square-faced old man looked at him and smiled. I think so too, but I hate it the most when people speak ill of others behind their backs. Trying to sow discord? Really dirty. He's already so old, yet he doesn't practice any magic all day. I don't know what he's thinking. He made a name for himself, when he was young. But when he's old, he only knows how to gnaw on a mountain of gold he earned when he was young. He likes to bully the younger generation when he has nothing better to do, and he always talks about respecting his elders. Such a person, the value of his life that he created when he was young is wasted when he's old. You, Arson glared at him. Skagen smiled and said, "All right, don't talk too much. Don't let the children laugh at you. A master should act like a master." Chapter 433. Outside the foothills of Mount Degia, a carriage came from afar. The coachman was a young girl dressed as a servant. She was beautiful and pleasant, but there was a stitched scar on her neck that looked like intersecting canine teeth. The girl reined in the horse's reins and stopped the carriage at the foot of the winding steps. She jumped off the carriage and opened the door. Her voice was emotionless. "We're here." Dean came out of the carriage. He tightened his master robe and said to Gwyneth, "Let's stop the carriage here. Come with me." Gwyneth nodded and ran to the side. She broke a branch and inserted it into the grass. She tied the rope and turned around to follow Dean. Today is really a lively day. Dean walked up the steps step by step. The black snow accumulated on the ground, and the green grass was desolate and withered. He could smell the smell and the faint noise from the top of the mountain. There was a smile on his face. There were some castles on the way to the church mountain. There was no shadow of a person inside. In a blink of an eye, Dean came to the outside of St. Peter's Church. He saw that the vast square was filled with figures. He turned around and walked towards the stone corridor. "Get out of here, Edward. You are just a pariah. Get out of here. Master Dean won't choose you as a student even if you stand in front of him. Get out of here. The stench of your body is making me sick." As soon as he reached the corridor, he heard a quarrel coming from the outer edge of the corridor. He saw 4 or 5 blonde and elegant figures gathered together, trying to squeeze into a suitable position. There were 2 brown-haired teenagers next to him. One was handsome, and the other was mediocre with freckles on his face. At the moment, the 2 shrank together and looked at the others, not daring to answer. Dean glanced at them and wanted to withdraw his eyes, but he saw that the brown-haired boy was clenching his fists tightly. Dean's eyes narrowed as he turned around and walked over. "Get out of here. It's a gift to allow pariahs like you to come and study here. How dare you fight with us? Pariahs, are you not convinced?" Several blond boys looked at them with disgust. Their faces were ugly, as if they had been humiliated by the 2. Whoosh! Suddenly, a nimble figure appeared in front of them. It was Gwyneth. They were shocked by the sudden appearance of Gwyneth. Their eyes were attracted by Dean, who was behind Gwyneth. His luxurious golden robe was too conspicuous. "Master? Master Dean." They were confused. Dean didn't pay attention to them. He waved to the brown-haired boy. "Come here." The brown-haired handsome boy was a little stunned. He looked left and right, suspecting that he had misunderstood. He raised his finger to point at his nose and said, "Mimi, it's you." Dean smiled. "Are you willing to be my student?" Hearing this, everyone was surprised. They looked at Dean with astonishment, and then looked at the handsome boy. The handsome youth felt as if his brain had gone blank. It took him a long time to react, and he stammered, Can I? Are you not willing?" Dean smiled. The handsome boy knew that it wasn't a dream. I'm willing. Master Dean, I'm willing to do anything you want me to do. Come here." Dean beckoned. The handsome boy hurried over, but was blocked by the stone guardrail. "What's your name?" "My name is Edward." Dean nodded and gently flicked his sleeves. Gwyneth jumped out of the guardrail. She lifted Edward's shoulder and jumped back into the corridor. "Come with me," Dean said. He didn't look at him anymore and continued to walk along the corridor. Edward felt as if he was in the clouds. He was in pain. It wasn't a dream. He was stunned for a moment as he looked at Dean's back. He quickly chased after him. Gwyneth followed behind Dean like a shadow. The blond boy and others looked at each other. They were at a loss. Dean's figure appeared in the corridor. All the people crowded in front of the church steps looked at him and cheered loudly. Edward was nervous and cramped as he felt the enthusiastic cheers and gazes around him. He didn't dare to stay too close to Dean, but he didn't dare to stay too far away. His heart was pounding and his face was red. Although Dean didn't look back, he noticed the embarrassment of his new student. He smiled. From now on, you are my student. In the future, you will go further than all of them. Don't be nervous. Edward was shocked as he heard Dadian speak. Yes, it's master. Oh no, teacher. Do you know why I accepted you as my student? Dadian asked as he walked. Edward shook his head blankly. He was just a little junior oracle with average talent, not to mention his family. Although he did not have to worry about food and clothing among the commoners and was relatively wealthy, such conditions were definitely the lowest in the temple. He was a little nervous and said, I don't know, teacher. Remember all the humiliation you have suffered since childhood. Do you understand? Dean whispered. Edward's face slightly changed as he recalled the matter. He bowed his head. I won't hate them, teacher. You won't, or you don't dare? I don't dare. Edward hesitated for a moment, but answered truthfully. Why? Edward plucked up his courage. We are all part of the temple. We should unite and love each other. They are nobles with noble blood. I can't hate them. Dean turned to look at him. You can't, or you don't dare? Edward looked into Dadian's eyes. He found that the genius master's eyes were very deep, like black stagnant water, but there was a mass of green in them. His heart beat wildly as he gritted his teeth. I dare not, Dean slowly said. As my student, you can't do anything that you don't dare to do. Do you understand? Edward was stunned. Dean's eyes narrowed as he turned around. He knew that it was difficult for him to change his mind, but he wasn't in a hurry. Hatred was the seed of rebellion. As long as it was cultivated, sooner or later it would grow into a towering tree. He looked into the distance outside the cloister and could vaguely see the vast and imposing Sylvia giant wall. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. You are here? Skagen smiled as he saw Dean coming from the corridor. You are right on time. It's almost 9 o'clock. The old man was surprised as he saw the two people behind Dean. Who are these two? She is my attendant, and he is my new student. I hope you can take care of him in the future. Dean smiled as he introduced them. Ivissa was surprised as he looked at Edward. He is just a primary architect. There are many senior architects who want to be your student. Why would you accept a primary architect? Dean laughed. It's too difficult for senior architects to change their profession. It's better to accept someone who has no foundation. Skagen nodded. That's good. It makes sense. Arson sneered. Master Dean is worried that he won't be able to teach the high-level architects. Studying magic depends on your talent, but teaching others depends on the accumulation of knowledge. Master Dean is still young. He is qualified to teach these low-level architects. Arson sneered at the side. Hearing this, the atmosphere suddenly became a little stiff. Dean looked at him and whispered, Do you think that you don't have the talent for the invention? Arson's face slightly changed. Are you insulting all the masters? Don't think that you can be arrogant just because you have made a legendary invention. Dadian whispered. Isn't it too despicable for you to force hatred on me? I advise you not to do stupid things like provoking me in the future. Otherwise, I don't mind kicking you in front of everyone. I believe that no one can stop me if I want to. Arson's face changed as he looked at Dean in anger. You! How dare you! Skagen and Ivissa tried to persuade him. Skagen looked at Dean. Today is a big day for you to teach. Don't lower yourself to his level. That's his temper. Dean didn't pay attention to them as he smiled at Arson. Since you asked me if I dare or not, I will give you an answer. He flicked his sleeves. Gwyneth's eyes flashed with a hint of hesitation, but she still moved. She appeared behind Arson as if she teleported. She lifted her foot and kicked his ass. Bang! Arson's body flew out and fell into the crowd below the high platform. It immediately caused an exclamation. The dense crowd spread out like a tide and gathered again to catch him. Skagen, Ivissa, and others' faces changed as they ordered people to go and help him. I'm sorry. My men are not sensible. Dean flicked his sleeves and said to the crowd, It's time for the lecture. I'll go first. Then he turned and stepped onto the platform. Gwyneth followed behind him. This man has a temper. The square-faced old man looked at Dean's back as he stroked his beard and muttered, Skagen glared at him. You're still gloating. The old man laughed. Evil people will be punished by evil people. Edward, who was standing at the side, was dumbfounded. The Grandmaster in his eyes was actually kicked off the stage by his own teacher's follower. It was just a verbal conflict, and he dared to act like this. He was simply too hot-tempered. Chapter 434. Wow. Everyone in the square cheered as Dean stood on the high platform on the steps of the church. Dean took a deep breath as he looked at the crowd. He knew that this was the key moment for the establishment of the gas faction. He waited for the crowd to quiet down a bit. First of all, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Dean. I'm 16 years old. I'll be 17 years old after the Black Snow season. I know that people will despise my age, but Mr. Smorgo was only 19 years old when he painted the Saint of the Mirror. Mr. Elliot was 14 years old when he played the first great piece of music, Moonlight. Mr. Curtis was 28 years old when he wrote The Art of War. Everyone quieted down as they heard Dean's words. Skagen, the old man, and others looked at each other. They didn't expect Dean to bring up the most famous figures in history for comparison. They couldn't help but sigh. They knew that Dean's purpose was to make people think about the fact that he produced the first legendary item, new textile machine, when he was only 16 years old. In the same year, he produced the second legendary item and opened up a new system of items. Every great work will be criticized by people when it comes out. Dean slowly said, but I hope that stubborn things like age and seniority won't affect your judgment of things. The audience was silent. Dean continued, today I'm going to give a lecture, but in fact I'm going to discuss with you. I believe that everyone is curious about the gas faction. Many masters have mentioned about it in the past few days, but it's inevitable that they are too esoteric. Today I'm going to talk about the origin and application of the gas faction. Hearing this, everyone's eyes lit up and they perked up their ears to listen. Skagen, the old man, and the others were concentrating on Dean in the distance. The key to the gas faction is the gas faction, just like the metal faction is the key to the metal. Dean said in an orderly manner, there are two things in the 9 great inventions that are inseparable from our lives. The first one is air, and the second one is water. At this point, there was a commotion below the stage. The people present included the 9 major systems. Dean's words had undoubtedly lowered the position of the other systems. It was difficult to accept. Skagen and the old man's complexion slightly changed. Although they were masters, but they belonged to different factions. No one thought that their faction was inferior to other factions. Even Ivissa always believed that Lightning faction was the truth of the world. Dean felt the restlessness in the atmosphere. The reason is very simple. First of all, let's take the Lightning faction as an example. Will we die immediately if we leave the Lightning faction? The answer is no. Will I die immediately after leaving the metal magic? I won't. What if I don't use wood magic? Without these magic, our lives will only be a little worse, but we won't die immediately. Hearing this, many people felt a little better in their hearts, but they were still somewhat unconvinced. Master Dean, according to you, we will die immediately if we leave the air and water divine incantations? How is that possible? Someone in the crowd shouted loudly. The speaker was a young man. He had no intention of changing the direction of his research to study air magic. He had only come to listen to this genius master's lecture and see what amazing things he would say. He didn't expect that after a few words, he would be infuriated half to death. Yes, I don't believe it. There were voices of agreement from the crowd. Dean raised his hand and waited for the crowd to calm down. We can verify it. First of all, what is the gas? As you can see, the most important thing is the air. Now you might as well cover your nose and mouth with your hands and refuse to breathe air. See how long you can last. Hearing this, everyone could not help but look at each other. Some of the primary architects in the crowd covered their noses when they heard Dean's words. However, some of the senior architects and intermediate architects didn't do so. They felt helpless as they knew what Dean was going to say. No one could live without air. Dean continued after a minute. You should understand now that you have verified it. Perhaps some of you will think that the role of air is to help us breathe. What is there to study? How can it compare to the mystery of the metal? How can it compare to the mystery of the lightning? How can it compare to the value of the wood faction? Many people in the crowd nodded slightly and looked up at Dean to see how he would answer. Dean smiled. Yes, the gas can't be used to make textile machines like the wood faction, nor can it be used to make swords like the metal faction. Everyone was stunned and felt a trace of strange. Dean had the most right to speak when it came to textile machines. Dean slowly said, "The gas isn't a physical thing, so it can't create metal and wood faction. But it is a substance like lightning. It can create destructive power that metal swords can't match. You should understand this point from the steam gun. Perhaps some people think that the power of the steam gun depends on the metal bullets. Yes, the real way to kill the enemy is the metal bullets. But if there is no gas, then the metal bullets are nothing." Dean looked at the crowd. Have you ever thought about it? What if the steam gun didn't eject metal bullets, but something bigger? For example, our carriage. Carriage? Everyone was shocked as they heard Dean's words. Skagen, the old man, and the others were stunned. Suddenly, their eyes burst into light. If the gas can push the metal bullets, then why can't it push the carriage? Dean looked at the crowd. Please imagine if you cast a huge carriage. You don't need horses to pull it. You just need to install 2 jets at the end of the carriage. The carriage will run faster than the horses. What kind of picture would that be? The audience was silent. Everyone was stunned. Some of them fell into contemplation. Dean didn't give them time to think. Does anyone have a bolder idea besides the carriage? Bolder? Everyone was puzzled as they looked at Dean's confident expression. It was already shocking that the carriage didn't rely on the horses. Wasn't it bold? Chapter 435. Fly to the Sky. Those 3 simple words silenced the entire place. Skagen, the old man, and others were shocked as they looked at the figure on the high platform. They felt as if a window had been opened in their minds. They suddenly felt as if they had touched a vast world. It must be known that ever since the emergence of the gas theory, the masters of various fields had paid attention to it and studied it. They were very clear that the kinetic energy produced by gas would produce wonderful changes in various fields in the future. Although they knew that chi would become a big knowledge in the future, but they didn't dare to imagine that humans could use the kinetic energy of chi to fly to the sky. Flying. This was the ability of the gods in the Bible. The giant wall of Sylvia shrouded the world. Flying meant that humans could cross the giant wall. Humans who lived on the ground couldn't even think about flying to the sky. However, Skagen and the others knew that this kind of thing wasn't absolutely impossible. The square was silent. Dudian continued. We all know archers. Archers shoot arrows and hit the enemy. The arrow is in the flying state. If we make something that is 100 times bigger than the bow and use people as arrows, can we make people fly? The elastic force of the bowstring is the driving force of the bow and arrow. The steam of the steam gun is the driving force of the metal bullet. We can walk and jump because of the power generated by the body. Humans can run faster and jump higher if the power is strong enough. Dudian slowly said, It isn't difficult for humans to fly to the sky if we can cleverly use the power generated by chi. This is the charm of the chi faction. Imagine that in the future war, we can fly in the sky with the help of the chi faction while the enemy can only stay on the ground. How can the barbarians outside the fortress survive? If we can fly, then we can even cross the giant wall and travel to the distant world outside the giant wall. Everyone's mind buzzed as they listened to Dudian's clear voice. It was as if they had seen a new world. Flying. This was something they had never dared to think about. But what would the future be like if humans could fly in the sky with the help of the invention? Some architects' eyes lit up. They were full of excitement. Although Dudian didn't come up with strong evidence to support his theory, but as a legendary master, he was able to put forward such a point of view. Most importantly, such a point of view was extremely advanced. They had never thought about it and didn't dare to think about it. Master, can we really use the invention to fly in the sky? Someone in the crowd couldn't help but ask. Yes, master, we are so heavy. Can we rely on the thin air to help us fly? Dean smiled as he heard the shouts. Do you know about kites? Kite? Everyone was at a loss. Some scratched their head as they felt that it was familiar. Dudian continued. It's a small invention that was born more than 100 years ago. Unfortunately, it wasn't popularized because of some reasons. If you're interested, then go to the library to find information about it. You will understand that it isn't difficult for us to fly in the sky. But don't underestimate the seemingly weightless air. Some people were surprised as they heard Dudian's words. They were ready to go to the library to find the magic kite that Dudian had mentioned. Skagen, the old man, and others were full of admiration as they heard Dudian's words. Kite? Why did he suddenly mention this forbidden technique? He is too bold. This is a forbidden thing. Didn't anyone remind him that the forbidden technique can't be publicized? Several masters frowned as they looked at Dudian. Some of them were worried for him, while others felt that Dudian was talking too much. Dudian was about to continue to introduce the basic knowledge of the air element. Suddenly, a figure rushed out from the corridor on the side of the square. Assassin? Enemy attack? Dudian turned around and saw the figure. He was surprised. It was much faster than Gwyneth. Whoosh! The 100-meter distance was covered in the blink of an eye, and the figure stopped on the high platform, motionless, as if he had been standing there since the beginning. He was wearing a white robe, and the material of the white robe was soft, without any unnecessary decorations. Half of his shoulder was exposed, and he was holding a wooden stick in his hand. At the end of the stick was a dazzling gemstone the size of a baby's fist. The gemstone was crystal clear, and it could cause countless noble ladies to scream. The sudden appearance of the figure caught the attention of the audience. Everyone was surprised. They didn't see when the stranger arrived. They only felt that there was one more person on the platform. Gwyneth's pupils shrank as she stood 3 meters behind Dudian. She put her hand on her dagger and stood in front of Dudian to protect him. Her palms were full of cold sweat. Saint from the inner wall. Skagen, the old man, and others were shocked when they saw the figure that suddenly appeared. They didn't expect a saint to suddenly appear here. They were bewildered for a while. Shameless boasting. The blonde youth glanced at Gwyneth, who was in front of Dudian. He didn't continue to pay attention to her. He coldly stared at Dudian. You have stolen the power of the devil. You have made contributions to the temple. I will give you a chance to live. Apologize and leave with me. Dudian narrowed his eyes. Who are you to talk nonsense? The blonde youth's eyes flashed. Don't look for death. Dean's face sank as he looked at him coldly. A lot of people like to talk to me like that, and now they are dead. Saint! Saint! At this time, several voices echoed from the side. Skagen and other masters trotted over. They shouted loudly as they arrived in front of Dudian and Gwyneth. Saint, why didn't you inform us that you had come from the inner wall? We would have come to greet you. Inner wall? Dean's eyes narrowed as he heard the words of Skagen and others. His eyes were filled with killing intent as he gloomily stared at the blonde youth. Many things flashed through his mind. The blonde youth was about to make a move when he saw Skagen and others. He frowned and said in a cold voice, I have arrived yesterday. This person has been bewitched by the devil. I have been ordered to capture him and send him to the monastery to be purified. Skagen and others were stunned. They turned to look at Dudian and then at the blonde youth. Skagen quickly said, Saint, is this a misunderstanding? Dean is a new genius master. He has not only created the new textile machine, but also other high-level inventions. Recently, he has created the legendary steam gun. He donated it to the military and helped us to win the barbarian war. How can he be related to the devil? The square-faced master and several other old men also spoke out in support of Dean. Dean didn't expect Skagen and others to protect him. He was surprised but felt a trace of warmth. He secretly thanked them for their kindness. Chapter 436. The blonde youth snorted as he heard the words of Skagen and others. The inner wall already knows about the new legendary item. It's a taboo technique and the power of the devil. A genius has fallen to the point of using the devil's power to earn fame. It's simply arrogant to proclaim the devil's power and blaspheme the grace of God. Skagen and others were startled. Duddian said in a cold voice, "The devil's power? How can you say that my new divine incantation is the power of the devil with just one sentence? What a joke. What evidence do you have? In my opinion, your words are the biggest blasphemy to the God of light." "Shut up," the blond youth shouted. His figure suddenly moved, and like a falcon spreading its wings, he pounced on Dean to capture him. Gwyneth's face slightly changed as she pulled out the dagger from her waist. "Get lost." The blond youth didn't show any mercy as he pounced on Gwyneth with his stick. Bang! The stick moved like a gust of wind as it hit Gwyneth's wrist. Under her shocked eyes, the dagger in her hand was knocked out and fell into the crowd. At the same time, he stepped forward and pressed his palm on her shoulder. Bang! Gwyneth's body flew out and fell more than 10 meters away, rolling on the ground. "Come over." The blond youth didn't stop after he sent Gwyneth flying. He raised his hand to grab Dean's shoulder. Dean's eyes flashed with anger. The moment he was about to grab him, he fiercely punched out. Bang! The fist hit the center of his palm, and a tremendous force surged out. The golden-haired young man's expression suddenly changed as he felt the incredible surging force in his palm. He hurriedly shook his wrist, wanting to release the force, but it was too late. A light cracking sound came from his palm joint, and his body that was rushing forward suddenly fell back. He took a few steps back on the high platform and looked at the black-haired young man in front of him with a face full of shock. Dean retracted his fist and looked at him coldly. "Are you a saint or a bandit? You want to arrest me? Please give me an explanation. We have painstakingly studied the new item, and you want to take us away with just a few words? Ridiculous." His voice was cold, but there was a trace of anger and killing intent in his heart. This matter was beyond his expectations. Suddenly, a strong person from the inner wall had come to arrest him. But the most important thing was that he had inexplicably provoked the people from the inner wall. The strength of the saint was obviously higher than that of Senior Hunter. He dared to capture the master of the temple in front of so many people. It could be seen that the force behind him was extremely powerful. He didn't care about the holy church and the temple of elements. The blond youth felt a burst of pain in his arm. He secretly endured the pain as he looked at Dean. Sure enough, a dignified master of the temple has such a strong power. "You better come back with me for interrogation and confess the power behind you. Otherwise, I followed the will of the God of Light to study the invention. I'm innocent. You don't have any evidence, and you want to arrest me? Do you think you can do whatever you want in the outer wall, just because you are from the inner wall?" Duddian pulled up the tiger's skin as he added onto the others. Skagen and others didn't expect things to become so stiff. They couldn't help but complain about the blond youth's way of doing things. They would have nothing to say if the blond youth wanted to arrest Dean in secret. But at the moment, he wanted to arrest Dean in front of more than half of the temple's architects. It put them in an awkward situation and made them lose their prestige. "Lord Saint, could there be a misunderstanding? You have to give an explanation if you want to arrest Master Dean." Skagen bit the bullet and said. The old man next to him said, "Yes, Master Dean is a legendary master of the temple. You have to say how he colluded with the devil. Otherwise, it will be hard to convince the public." "Yes, yes. Shouldn't you give an explanation?" The others echoed. They were masters and didn't want to get involved in this mess. But the blond youth's actions had undoubtedly embarrassed all the masters. The blond youth's face turned gloomy as he heard the words of Skagen and others. Although he didn't put the masters in his eyes, but he knew that there would be some trouble if he wanted to arrest Dean in public. If Dean didn't talk about flying and other taboo things, then he wouldn't have made a move midway. He would have waited for Dean to finish talking. Moreover, he wanted to capture Dean as it would save him a lot of time. He would leave the rest of the matter to the temple. He was only responsible for capturing Dean. He didn't expect that the weak architect would have such a strong strength. He was injured because of his carelessness. He is an architect, but he has such a strong strength. Isn't that evidence? The blonde youth said in a gloomy tone. The people who were waiting for the blonde youth to speak were speechless. Saint, Master Dean is not only a master, but also a knight of the Knight's Hall. It isn't unusual for him to have such abilities. It has nothing to do with the devil's power. The Knight's Hall can testify to this. Skagen explained. Knight? The blonde youth's face changed. Dean was paying attention to the blonde youth. He saw the subtle changes in the youth's face. He narrowed his eyes. It seemed that his identity as a knight was able to make the blonde youth afraid of him. Could it be inferred that the Knight's Hall also had influence in the inner wall? Yes, Master Dean is an honorary Golden Knight of the Knight's Hall. He helped us repel the barbarians and save countless civilians. He is a great hero, the old man next to him said. The blonde youth was startled as his face turned ugly.